When my cousin was 16 and I was 18, we had a routine of heading to the beach at night to smoke weed. This was around 2008, a time when weed was still illegal, so we tried to stay unpredictable by visiting different public beaches in our coastal town. One particular beach had a steep road leading down to it. At the bottom, the road leveled out into a long, single-row parking lot with a view of the ocean. We always kept an eye out for police cars descending the hill, since you could easily spot them and plan your escape. Other cars occasionally came and went for the same reason, but everyone kept to themselves. One night, after picking up my cousin, we drove to the beach and parked near the sand to start our usual activities. Cars would sporadically come and go, but mostly we were alone. Then, a minivan drove down the hill and into the lot. Instead of parking, it stopped with its headlights glaring directly at my car's driver's side. Annoyed by the blinding lights, we considered leaving. The van then moved to the end of the lot, turned around, and pointed its lights at my car's passenger side. Our annoyance turned to paranoia. Perhaps they were looking for someone, maybe a parent searching for a partying teen. We decided to wait it out. Just as we began to relax, thinking they were leaving, the minivan stopped behind my car, blocking us in. We tried to see who was inside, hoping it was just someone being weird. But when we heard a door open, I told my cousin we needed to get out of there. I started my old sedan and drove onto the sand, the only way out. Miraculously, the car had enough traction, and I managed to turn around and get back on the paved lot, heading for the exit. The minivan pursued us up the hill and down the street while we panicked. Luckily, knowing the neighborhood well, I was able to lose them after making a few sharp turns. We never saw the van again and avoided the beach for a while. Looking back, it seems likely that whoever was in that van had bad intentions, perhaps even something as sinister as trafficking. When I was 8 and my sister was 5, we decided to walk home from school instead of waiting for our parents, who were late. We lived in a rural area back then. Enjoying the sunny day and feeling grown up, we were taken aback when a silver sedan slowed down beside us. The driver, a man with a mostly bald head, black gloves, and a big smile, leaned over and opened the passenger door, forcing us to step around it. He claimed our mom was sick and he had been sent to pick us up. A sense of unease crept over me. I had never seen this man before. He tried to reassure us, asking if we liked candy, while pointing to some Halloween treats on the car's burgundy seat. His eyes were fixed on my sister, barely glancing at me. I took my sister's hand and, following what our dad had taught us, said no and started walking away. The man began reversing, keeping the door open and blocking our path. His demeanor changed. The smile vanished, and he gripped the steering wheel tightly, shouting at us to get in the car. Fear overwhelmed me as I saw him reach for my sister. I yelled for her to run, and we sprinted away. He continued backing up the car, but we dashed through fields and abandoned lots. Hearing the car slam to a stop, I knew we needed to hide. I pulled my sister under an old wooden structure over a ditch and into an overgrown abandoned lot. We lay flat in the tall grass, my sister crying softly until I signaled her to be quiet. We stayed hidden, listening to the car door slam, the man's footsteps crunching on gravel, his swearing, more footsteps, a passing car, and finally the sound of the engine driving away. Frozen in fear, we waited a while longer until I cautiously lifted my head to check. He was gone. Holding hands tightly, we ran home, terrified. That day remains one of the most frightening experiences of my life. And it turned out my mom wasn't sick at all. I was doing my usual night stimmying, something I do to relax as I'm autistic. This usually involves walking back and forth at night, pacing, and sometimes standing in the dark hallway talking to myself, or even when the light is on. Anyhow, I was just doing my thing, enjoying myself. I took a break to stop pacing and stood in front of my parents' door. At one point, I think I used their bathroom, but after closing the door, I just continued my routine. So there I was, standing there with my eyes closed, minding my own business. Like any normal person not sleeping, I eventually opened my eyes to continue what I was doing. However, when I did, I saw someone standing right in front of me. It was a dark silhouette of a woman or just a person. I couldn't make out any facial features. I was taken aback and a bit scared. My immediate reaction was to scream and cover my eyes. I called out to my mom, and while it felt like forever, she eventually responded. My older sister also asked if I was okay. They both hugged me and apologized for what I had experienced. Not long after, my mom invited me to watch a cartoon with her. My sister asked if I was coming back to our room, but I decided to stay with my mom and watch TV. She asked what I saw, and I told her I thought I saw a woman. She suggested that maybe it was because we had been watching Dirty Pop, the boy band scam about Lou Pearlman and his mistreatment of boy bands and others involved in his schemes. The creepy music and imagery might have triggered it. I'm not entirely sure that's the case. She also commented on how the show could have just explained things instead of showing so much, though we both knew the visuals were necessary to understand the story. On a lighter note, my mom and I ended up watching Kipper on Prime Video, and she asked if I wanted to sleep in her room for the night, since she felt lonely with my dad working overnight shifts. I agreed, and it was nice to spend that time with her. To sum up, I don't really know what caused this to happen. It could have been the documentary series on Netflix, my imagination, or even the scary things I watch on YouTube. Or maybe, just maybe, it was my deceased grandmother who passed away in 2019 when she was younger. I can't be sure, so yeah. I'll start from the beginning. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but I wanted to record what I've seen here. My name's Emma Hayes. I thought I had found the perfect hunting spot, a quiet piece of public land. Now I'm unsure where I am. I went in the day before opening day of whitetail season to set up my ladder stand, a few hundred yards into the woods. It was a struggle to carry it in, but I hoped it would be worth it. I was so excited that I barely slept that night. I arrived at my spot just before dawn. I stepped out of my truck into the darkness, rifle in hand, and made my way through the dense woods, checking my path with a penlight every few steps. After nearly tripping several times, I finally saw the ladder. I climbed up, carefully settling into the seat. I realized I should have used the paracord to pull my rifle up after climbing. I'll remember that next time. I readied my Remington, checking the metallic cartridge in the moonlight, and prepared for the hunt. Minutes before dawn, the pre-dawn chill crept through the woods. As the light began to filter through the trees, I spotted the largest buck I had ever seen, about 20 yards away. My heart raced and my hands shook. I took a deep breath, steadied my aim, and fired. The buck stumbled and ran deeper into the woods. I was ecstatic and hurried down the ladder to track it. Just as I reached the ground, I slipped and heard a gunshot echo through the woods. Someone else must have seen my deer and shot at it. I found the blood trail and followed it, convinced the buck couldn't be far. But as I walked, I noticed something strange. The sun hadn't moved. It stayed in the same position, as if time had stopped. I came across a green canvas tent in a clearing. I called out but got no response. The campsite had a transistor radio and an old oil lantern, not the modern LED kind. I muttered something about hipsters and checked the tent. 2 empty sleeping bags and some clothes, but no people. I continued following the blood trail and soon stumbled upon an old truck by a spring. An old man with a faded felt hat was there, collecting water. "Excuse me, sir," I said. The old man looked surprised and reached for his back. I raised my hand in peace, despite holding a rifle. I asked if he had seen my deer. He just stared at me, then slowly shook his head. "Nice truck," I commented, trying to ease the tension. He finally spoke in a deep, gravelly voice. "It's been a good one." He said something about a beard, and I looked at my reflection in the truck window, noticing my skin looked ghostly pale. I touched my face and saw my hand was the same. The old man then said something unsettling. "There's something following you." I turned, but saw nothing. He mentioned it's different for everyone and that it's best to go toward it rather than try to escape. Before I could ask more, he started his truck and drove away. Confused, I decided to head back to my truck for water. I had been walking for over an hour, but the sun still hadn't moved. Retracing my steps, I reached the campsite again, but it was now in shambles. The tent was torn, the table overturned, and the lanterns broken. I was standing in a pool of blood. My own footprints were bloody. A growl behind me made my heart race. I ran through the woods, tripping over a root and falling into darkness. When I came to, my vision was blurry, and my chest ached. I staggered toward a gap in the trees and saw my truck in a field. As I reached it, I blacked out again. I woke up under the stars with a small fire nearby. The old man was there. "Easy, son," he said. He pointed to my rifle on a log. "I'm going to help you get out." He asked about the second gunshot, and I told him it was close. He asked if I'd seen anything strange, then mentioned something was following me and that we needed to get to the river. I doubted there was a river, but he insisted. We walked through the brush, and he pointed out a buck with ghostly white eyes and a rotting bullet wound. Before I could react, a monstrous bear with similar eyes burst through the brush. I ran, the bear close behind, until I reached a riverbank. The old man handed me 2 strange silver coins and pushed me into the river. The water was dark and smelled foul. I swam across, and as I climbed out, I felt weak. Somehow, I was suddenly back at my truck. I couldn't find my keys, so I took out my phone and started this note. Day 2. The doctors finally spoke to me this morning. They believe Daniel fell from the tree stand, and the rifle accidentally discharged, hitting him in the chest. He's lucky to be alive, but seems confused about what happened. They think it might be due to pain medication or trauma. When I saw him, he kept asking about the old man and the bear. I told him there are no bears around here and no one lives near where he was found. He insisted the bear was by his truck when they found him. After some time, he seemed to accept it was a hallucination. Then he asked for his flannel shirt from the hazmat can in the corner. Despite the bloodstains, he insisted on checking its pocket and pulled out 2 strange silver coins. I don't remember my exact age when this happened, but I remember it pretty vividly. I was maybe 10 to 14 years old. For context, my room was really an extra living room and was close to the driveway. My driveway entered off the road, led to my backyard, did a little circle, and connected itself to the driveway again. It wasn't a big circle, more of a long driveway. In my room, there was a window facing the road, 2 windows on the right wall along with a door that led outside, and 1 window opposite the road that faced the backyard with the circle pavement. On the left wall was a door that led to the kitchen and living room. The way my house was built, every other room was on the opposite side of the house. There was also a factory across the road from where I lived. For reference, I don't know if you guys believe in ghosts or not, but my house was haunted, according to my family. These 2 ghosts that my older brother, David, was seeing apparently were messing with him. I forget if that whole situation happened before this or not. Another weird thing my little brother, Michael, told me years ago. One day, my mother told Michael to go to his room and put some clothes away. The lights were off in his room at the time. As he was putting the clothes away, he looked down to open the drawer and saw some black shoes, as if someone was standing beside him. He looked up and saw a man in a black hat with a black face. He ran to our mom and told her what happened, but she didn't believe him. The room where this happened to Michael was the same room where David slept and saw one of the ghosts that messed with him. I usually slept with the lights off when I was younger, which led to me waking up one night to the lights being off, which was normal. But being a young preteen, I was scared of the fact that I was on the opposite side of my house. So, I always tried to have a phone within arm's reach in case anything ever happened. A few seconds after I woke up, I started to hear metal being dragged right outside my room door that led outside. It sounded like it started from the beginning of my right wall, which was the beginning of the circle pavement in my backyard, and went down toward the driveway. I instantly froze, too scared to move a muscle. A few seconds passed, and then I heard an evil laugh. I know it sounds dumb, but I'm serious. It continued to go down the side of the wall, sounding like someone dragging a shovel on the concrete and laughing. I didn't move a muscle, frozen and unsure of what to do. In the back of my mind, I wanted to move and peek out the window to see what it was. But my imagination pictured some evil person or thing that would look right at me if I peeked out the blinds. It continued to the point where it got to my windows facing the driveway. I was still frozen. So, I imagined whatever it was currently facing the road a few feet in front of my window. I promise you, the sound stopped, and an even more evil laugh happened. Then a sound of vibration started to the point where I felt it. It almost sounded like a portal or something, which I know makes no sense, but at that time, I really believed that could be a possibility, and I honestly still believe that vibration was caused by whatever was outside my house that day. As this was going on, I tried to think of the most reasonable explanations that could be causing this. I imagined it might be the factory across the street, but I've never heard the vibration again after that day. The vibration lasted a few seconds along with the laugh, and then almost instantly the vibration stopped along with the laugh and everything. I ended up not moving and falling back asleep, trying to understand what I just heard. The following morning, I asked my parents if they were outside at night. They said no, which was weird to me because I know I heard something. Now, I know this sounds made up, or that there could be some reasonable explanation for this, but I have been unable to understand what really happened that night. I know I didn't dream this. I honestly believe that night something was walking outside my house that is out of this world. A few months ago, I left my friend Alex's house at about 3 or 4 in the morning. I was 17 and drove a very recognizable blue car with stickers on the back. As I was on the road leading to my neighborhood, I realized that this car behind me had been there for a very long time. It was a bigger white car, and their brights were on, so I couldn't see who was inside. I got extremely suspicious and decided to drive past my neighborhood and into a different one. I turned left into the neighborhood and then made a right turn. They were still behind me. I made another right turn and another until I was out of the neighborhood. I made an extremely sharp right turn back into that neighborhood, and this white car made the exact same moves that I did. I was so scared and afraid to look away from the road for even 1 second, so I didn't grab my phone to call the police. I've been to this neighborhood a couple of times, and I knew that it had some dead ends for resident driveways. I was terrified I would end up in one. I made a bunch of crazy turns and pressed on the gas, trying so hard not to panic or turn into a dead end. I lost sight of them for a second. I quickly parked my car in between 2 others that were parked, and I ran out of my car into a dark area between 2 houses, where I sat behind a bush, crying and shaking. I waited a while before I got up and walked around the neighborhood with stealth until the coast was clear. I knew they would recognize my car, and I didn't know what would happen if I was still inside. Did I do the right thing? Is there a better way to prevent this? Hi everyone, my name is Emma and I'm 17 years old. I'm sharing my story here because I feel like there's nowhere else I can turn. I've heard that there are understanding people here, so I'm pleading with you to take my words seriously and not turn this into a joke. This might seem confusing at first, but I'll explain everything from the beginning, as best as I can before she finds out. Ever since I was little, my mother has always had strict rules about where my siblings and I could go in our house. To give you some context, our house is actually divided into 5 separate units, plus a garage that's split into 3 rooms with a bathroom. Currently, my mother and I only use 2 of these units. The others are either too dirty or simply unused. When my brother and sister were still living with us, they stayed in the 3rd unit, but since it's just the 2 of us now, as a child, I was naturally curious and loved exploring. My friends and I would often sneak into abandoned houses in our town, just to spook each other out. It was a lot of fun, and they always wanted to explore the old rooms in my house. But I would always dodge their requests with excuses like, "There's nothing in there," or "It's boring." The truth is, there was a reason I wasn't allowed to explore those areas, a reason that was never spoken. I've always been a pretty honest person, so I'd ask my mother for permission before doing anything. But whenever I'd ask to go into the unused units or even the other rooms in the garage, she'd get annoyed and say, Is that really necessary? You might wonder why I didn't just sneak a peek when she wasn't around. The thing is, even when she was gone, I had this nagging fear that she'd somehow find out and get angry. I've always dreaded making my mother angry. Our fights weren't frequent, but they were awful, and she'd always pull out the guilt trip. Oh, so I'm just a bad mother? Just thinking about that phrase sends shivers down my spine. So I avoided her bad side until a few days ago. Recently, my mother, my brother Jack, and I visited my grandparents. We helped with some gardening and had the usual small talk about life and the weather. Jack, who is 26, doesn't live with us anymore, so it was nice to catch up. We talked about our shared love for video games. Then, as the evening wore on and we had a few drinks, the conversation turned more serious. Jack mentioned how our mother was always weird about certain parts of the house. Wait, was she always like that? I asked. Oh yeah, Jack replied. Even if I just wanted to grab something from the garage, she'd get annoyed and do it herself. I was surprised. Our mother had mellowed out over the years, and my arguments with her were nothing compared to what Jack and our sister, Lily, experienced. It's strange, I said. She never really liked us doing things on our own. Jack nodded. Yeah, she never taught us any life skills. I had to learn basic things like cooking and laundry from my girlfriend. We shared a strange, melancholy moment. Our childhood wasn't terrible, but it certainly was odd. I laughed a little. You and Lily are best friends, right? Jack smirked. They never got along, always bickering and fighting. But then he said something that stuck with me. I have to admire one thing about Lily, he said. She never took crap from Mom. Lily was always the rebellious one, unafraid to stand her ground, even if it meant clashing with our mother. She moved away to live with relatives when she was 16, and we never really knew why. Jack shrugged when I asked if he knew what happened. Wouldn't be surprised if it had something to do with those off-limits places in the house. I laughed, trying to hide how much that thought unsettled me. Yeah, maybe she found some dark family secret. Our conversation was interrupted when my mother walked in, giving us her usual piercing stare. Jack quickly changed the subject to a video game, and she seemed satisfied with his explanation. But something about her demeanor felt off. The next morning, I couldn't sleep. I got up early, grabbed a snack, and noticed my mom's work schedule on the calendar. She had a night shift. As I was about to eat, I heard the front door open. My heart raced. It was my mother, dressed in dark clothes. "What are you doing up?" she asked, clearly startled to see me. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. She made some excuse about getting something from the garage, but something felt wrong. I asked her about Lily, and she laughed, saying she hadn't heard from her. The whole encounter left me with a sick feeling in my stomach. I spent the rest of the day in my room, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. My mother left for work, and I decided it was time to explore the house, to see what was behind all those locked doors. I started with Unit 2. To my surprise, the door opened easily. The room was clean, not dusty as my mother had claimed. There were boxes neatly stacked, filled with clothes from different eras, labeled from A to G. It felt like a collection from generations past. But something about it was unsettling. Next, I moved to Unit 1. There, I found something far more disturbing. A desk with multiple monitors, all showing different parts of our house. One of them was my room. Another screen showed a strange room I didn't recognize, filled with medical equipment like a NICU. My stomach churned. This was something straight out of a horror movie. In a daze, I made my way to the garage, desperate to understand what was happening. The first part of the garage was familiar, but the other rooms were locked. Desperation led me to climb up to a small window in the garage's roof. I squeezed through, landing in a room that smelled putrid and felt wrong. The room was alive. The walls were covered in what looked like human skin, and in the center was a grotesque mass of flesh, with eyes staring right at me. Panic took over. I scrambled out, my ankle getting torn in the process. Somehow, I made it back to the house, tied off my leg with an old shirt, and tried to process what I had just seen. Now I'm sitting here terrified. The front door just opened, I think my mother is home. I don't know what she'll do if she finds out I've been exploring. If anyone is out there, please, I need help. I worked as a certified nursing assistant, CNA, at a lovely senior care facility in Springfield, Vermont. During my first year there, we were often short-staffed, so I volunteered to cover a night shift after a long day shift. After the residents had gone to bed, the CNAs gathered in the lounge area to catch up on our paperwork. We were busy updating our records when a light turned on at the end of the hallway. Knowing that a particular resident often needed help at night, I quickly went to check on her. As I entered her room, I saw a shadowy mist hovering above her. She was visibly upset, pointing at the mist and claiming it was there to take her away. Although I'm not particularly religious, I knew I needed to calm her down. I decided not to acknowledge the mist and instead turned off the light and held her hand. We said a quiet prayer together, and the mist disappeared. She eventually calmed down and fell asleep, and I quietly left her room, returning to the lounge. When I shared the incident with my colleagues, we all agreed it couldn't go in our official reports. Interestingly, other staff had seen similar occurrences on the night shift for weeks. Another memorable experience happened during a shift change. A CNA friend of mine, who also wrote in his free time, stayed to help with the day shift. We had just finished helping the residents get ready for activities held in the basement, where most of the administrative offices were located. As we were heading back to the elevator, we saw someone exit a bathroom and turn the corner towards the elevator. We called out, "Hold the elevator!" But when we reached the corner, no one was there. It was odd because there was no other exit or place for the person to have gone. My friend and I just looked at each other, puzzled, wondering if we had imagined it. There was also a touching moment involving one of our residents who had just turned 100 years old. She had received a letter from the President of the United States at the time, and I had the honor of reading it to her. After a few days off, I returned to work to find out she had peacefully passed away in her sleep. During our staff meeting, the nurse on duty mentioned that the call light in her room kept going off. Just as she said this, the panel lit up again for that room. Thinking it was her roommate, I volunteered to check it out. But when I entered, the room was empty, and the light was coming from the bed where the resident had passed. I thought it might be a technical glitch and replaced the plug, but the light continued to turn on. It wasn't until I recalled a tradition I'd heard of, opening a window after someone passes to let their spirit leave, that I decided to try it. I opened the window and, surprisingly, the call light stopped going off. I closed the window at the end of my shift, and the light never came on again after that. I'm going to keep this short, but a little backstory is necessary. My siblings and I grew up in a challenging household with our single mom. As the oldest, I often bore the brunt of the issues at home. My youngest sibling, who's 6 years younger than me, has always been close to both our mom and me. He hated seeing us argue, which happened quite a bit when I was a teenager. My brother would often try to mediate between us. Fast forward to today, our mother has passed away, and we never reconciled or even got back in touch. A few months ago, I had a vivid dream where my brother, our mom, and I were sitting in the living room, just chatting. The details of the conversation weren't important, but as often happened in real life, the discussion escalated into an argument. Suddenly, she lunged at me, pinning me down and choking me. I could hear my brother pleading for us to stop. The experience felt incredibly real. Our mom looked like she did a decade ago, while my brother and I appeared as we do now. I woke up gasping for air, feeling lightheaded and with my heart racing. I couldn't go back to sleep. The next morning, I mentioned the nightmare to my brother over our daily Snapchat streak. He was shocked and said, "No way, I had the same dream. She was choking you, right?" It was creepy, especially since he could describe exactly what we were wearing in the dream. We joke about it now, but it was genuinely scary at the time. This kind of shared dream hasn't happened before or since. I hope others can relate to this or at least get a bit of a scare from our experience. This happened about 6 years ago when I was 20 years old, working my first job at a restaurant. I was a dishwasher and busser, and it was a typical Saturday night. After closing, my coworker and I stayed behind to clean the place. Restrooms, kitchen, dining area, the usual. My coworker was busy in the kitchen handling dishes, so I decided to get a head start on the dining area. I put up all the chairs and started sweeping, listening to music as I went about my routine. As I swept, moving tables and rugs as I always did, I suddenly felt uneasy, like someone was watching me. I tried to shake it off and keep working, but the feeling only got stronger. There were 2 tables across from each other at the end of the dining area. One was by the window facing the street, and the other, table 12, was near the restrooms. When I got a clear view of table 12, things got really creepy. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure, like a man, peeking at me from the booth. Every time I turned to look directly at the table, the figure seemed to disappear. I was terrified, sweating and feeling a strange, indescribable sensation, but I decided to tough it out and keep cleaning. It seemed like whatever was there didn't like that I was ignoring it. The restaurant had service buttons on each table that customers could press to get a server's attention. As I got closer to table 12, I suddenly heard the familiar ding of the service bell. I ran to the host stand where a small screen shows which table called for service, and sure enough, it was table 12. I immediately went to the kitchen to tell my coworker what had happened. He was still cleaning with both headphones in and laughed when I told him the story. But then I asked him to listen. We both stood still, and sure enough, we heard the service bell again. We checked the screen, and it was table 12 once more. My coworker's expression shifted from amusement to fear as he realized I was telling the truth. We decided it was best to leave and inform the owner and manager about the incident. The next morning, we explained everything to the owner, who just laughed it off, saying it was no big deal. We finished the cleaning before opening the restaurant that day. The owner had previously joked about a ghostly presence, but we always thought he was kidding. It turns out the restaurant was built on the site of an old retirement home where several elderly people had passed away. The owner mentioned that the spirits of the former residents sometimes made their presence known. Things returned to normal after that, but this experience was the scariest thing I've ever encountered. I still get chills when I think about it. In the summer of 2022, I was feeling pretty desperate and frustrated. I had left my job a few months earlier to start my own business, but things weren't going as planned. My wife and I had welcomed our daughter after years of IVF treatments, which was a blessing, but the financial and emotional pressures were piling up. I needed a break to clear my head and recharge, so I planned a 2-night getaway with our 2 dogs to a secluded lake in the mountains, about 3 hours from home. I chose this particular spot because it was one of my favorite places and I knew the area well. I packed up my gear, loaded the dogs into the car, and headed out early one Tuesday morning. When I arrived at the trailhead, the parking lot was empty. Being midweek, I was glad to have the place to myself. The hike to the lake was about 5 miles up a narrow trail, and we didn't encounter a single person along the way. By midday, we reached the lake. It was as beautiful and peaceful as I remembered. Crystal clear water and not another soul in sight. I spent the afternoon fishing and gathering firewood, enjoying the solitude. I found a good spot on the eastern shore to set up camp, about 30 yards from the trail. I would have explored further, but snow still covered much of the higher trails, making them difficult to navigate, even for my dogs. As evening approached, I returned to camp after catching some fish for dinner. When I arrived, I noticed something strange. My backpack, which I had hung on a tree limb, was now neatly placed on the ground about 20 feet away, with a large feather on top. My dogs started growling low, but there was no one around. A strange symbol was carved into the dirt outside my tent. It looked like 2 interconnected U-shapes, almost like a simple bird or eagle design. It was fresh, like someone had just been there, but there were no tracks in the snow or mud. A sense of unease washed over me. I quickly built a large campfire, feeling the need for light and security as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. That night was unnerving. I pulled the dogs into the tent with me and kept my knife and flashlight close. Throughout the night, I was awakened by strange sounds, distant yelling, shrieks, and the snapping of branches. The dogs would alert me with growls and barks, and each time, I'd shine my flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing to be seen. At one point, the dogs' growling woke me, and I decided to investigate. Carefully, I unzipped the tent and shone my light outside. To my surprise, a doe and her fawn were standing just a few feet away, along with a whole herd of deer. As the dogs barked, the deer bolted into the woods, making a loud commotion. As the noise faded, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. Deep, maniacal laughter, which quickly turned into sobbing and then into a guttural growling sound that was far more menacing than anything the dogs or even a bear could produce. I held the dogs close, unable to sleep for the rest of the night. As soon as the first light appeared in the sky, I packed up and left. I've never felt that level of fear before or since, and the experience still haunts me. Has anyone else experienced something like this? It's been 2 years, and I still can't explain what happened. I need answers. This summer has been the hottest I've ever experienced, not just here in Pittsburgh, but across the entire country. The heat has been so intense that even the most dedicated outdoor enthusiasts, like myself, have been forced to retreat indoors or venture out during cooler times. A few nights ago, despite the heat, I decided to go for an evening run. I consider myself a seasoned runner and thought I could handle a few miles, even with the sweltering temperatures. The weather app on my phone showed 88 degrees Fahrenheit, but the evening looked beautiful with a sky full of vibrant colors: vermilion, rust, pinks, and light magenta. It was around 8 p.m. when I set off for what the locals call Sunset Park. Officially named Becker Park, it's earned the nickname Sunset Park because of its stunning views from a small bluff. From my house, it's just over a mile through the back streets to the park entrance. I took it easy since I had run a 5-mile loop around a nearby lake the day before. The fading light painted the sky like a postcard, making the run seem almost magical. The park is nestled at the end of a quiet road, surrounded by woods. It features a small baseball field with a paved path encircling it. Usually, I do a couple of laps around the path before heading home, but this time something felt off. As I approached the park, I noticed a dead-end sign near the entrance chain. This caught my attention because there's actually another side entrance with a gravel lot, so the sign seemed odd. Additionally, a Crime Watch sign with the iconic I logo stood out, something I hadn't paid attention to before. Entering the park, I started my first lap around the field. The air was still, and unusually, I didn't see anyone else around. Normally, I'd see other runners, dog walkers, or kids on bikes. That evening, it was eerily empty. Halfway through my first lap, an overpowering stench hit me. A smell of something decaying. I gagged and looked around, only to see an odd-looking older couple walking nearby. They seemed to be in their late 50s or early 60s, both a bit overweight. The man had a bald head with short white hair on the sides and a long, straight white mustache, giving him a walrus-like appearance. His wife was short with straight hair just past her ears, wearing grandma glasses. What struck me were their clothes. Both wore short-sleeved raincoats. His was light blue, hers was light pink. It was an unusual choice, especially since it wasn't raining. As I got closer to pass them, I remarked, "Something smells like death over here. Probably a dead raccoon or something." They didn't respond, just smiled at me. But their smiles were unsettling, almost forced, which gave me goosebumps. As I jogged past, I noticed they were staring into the woods, looking horrified. On my second lap, the smell of rot seemed to follow me. The couple was still standing there, fixated on something in the woods. As I approached the spot where the path meets the trails, I decided to see what had caught their attention. The smell intensified, but I couldn't see anything unusual. When I turned back, the couple had vanished. Couldn't believe it. They were just there, and now they were gone. I scanned the woods, but there was no trace of them. The only option seemed impossible. Either they had sprinted away at lightning speed or something strange was happening. Uneasy, I picked up my pace to leave the park. As I exited, the air felt heavy with a sense of dread. The sun, unusually red, was setting, and the whole scene felt surreal. My heart pounded as I ran home, convinced I was being followed. When I arrived, it was almost dark, and the streetlights had come on. I turned into my small, quiet street, and to my shock, the couple was standing at the bottom of my driveway. "Are you kidding me?" I blurted out, alarmed. I was shocked to see them there. "What are you doing here?" I shouted, unable to keep my composure. I tried to rationalize their presence. Maybe they needed help or had followed me for some reason. But as I got closer, I noticed something terrifying. Their clothes and faces were bloodied, matching the eerie red of the sunset. Panicking, I sprinted into my house, slamming and locking the door behind me. Inside, I checked my Ring doorbell footage. The camera showed me arriving, but the couple was nowhere in sight. I played back the recording, hearing my own voice talking, but to no one. They weren't there on the screen at all. Rattled, I ran upstairs to tell my wife what had happened. She was already in bed and didn't believe a word of it, thinking I was trying to scare her. I tried to convince her by showing the Ring footage, but she just got annoyed, thinking it was a prank. The next morning, while we had our coffee, we turned on the local news. As I stepped into the kitchen, my wife suddenly shouted, "Alan, get in here." I rushed back to find her staring at the TV, where the top story was a chilling headline: "Retired couple found dead in local park." The picture on the screen showed the couple I had seen the night before, wearing those same blue and pink raincoats. Back in my early 20s, I was hitchhiking along the west coast of the USA. One day, I ended up on the outskirts of a city. Let's call it Pacific City. While exploring, I stumbled upon a hidden, overgrown section of a cemented canal. It seemed like a quiet spot, so I set up my tent there for the night. Not the safest choice, as flash floods can be a real danger. The night passed uneventfully, and in the morning, I left my tent with some heavier, replaceable items like dog food and canned goods. I headed into the city to busk. When I returned to my makeshift camp, my heart sank. My tent was now on the opposite side of the trickling stream in the canal. Immediately, I thought someone had tampered with my things. But when I opened the tent, everything was exactly as I had left it. It was unnervingly untouched. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was tired when I set up or took a different route back. Still, something felt off. It was already late, and I didn't have time to find a new spot, so I decided to stay. I moved my tent back across the stream and settled in with my dog, keeping a knife by my side just in case. As night fell, I couldn't shake my unease and ended up reading under the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. Despite the distraction, sleep eluded me. Hours dragged by. The peaceful buzz of the night was suddenly interrupted by the rhythmic clicking of claws on cement. A wave of dread washed over me. I grabbed my knife and held my dog close, trying to keep her calm and quiet. The footsteps drew nearer, and my blood ran cold. It sounded like just one creature, without a human companion. I tried to reassure myself that it would pass by without incident. But then it stopped directly across the stream from my tent. I heard it sniffing and scratching at the ground. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously peeked through the netting at the top of the tent. What I saw was a creature that looked like something out of a nightmare. It was black and covered in dust, with a barrel chest and a hunched back. Its feet seemed too large for its body, and it had a mane of fur running from its head down to where a tail should have been. The rest of its skin was stretched tight over its bones. It was small, maybe around 30 pounds, much smaller than my dog, but it filled me with terror. Instinctively, I ducked back down, hoping it hadn't seen me. I held onto my dog and knife, listening as the creature paced back and forth, sniffing and scratching at the ground. It grew more agitated, moving faster and growling, snapping its jaws at the air. I stayed completely still, heart pounding, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and casually walked back down the canal. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I stayed alert, clutching my dog and knife until the first light of dawn. As soon as the sun rose, I packed up my things. Before leaving, I went to the spot where the creature had been. The ground was marked with scratches. Taking a deep breath, I quickly left the area. I haven't returned to Pacific City since that eerie encounter. Never before or since have I been so scared of an animal. Whatever it was, that night left me with an unforgettable feeling, like I was prey to something strange and unsettling. Something sharp, hungry, and skittering. Some might call it a chupacabra, but I'm not sure what to believe. All I know is that I'll carry the memory of that night with me forever. So I have a creepy story that happened to me when I was 12. My grandparents were staying with my family for a while, and one day they decided to go for a walk. At first, I didn't want to join them, but after about half an hour, I changed my mind. I told my mom and headed out. It was late evening, almost nighttime, so it was pretty spooky outside. I walked into the park, assuming that's where my grandparents went. As I got closer to the playground area, it's a straight path, and you can see the playground in the distance once you enter the park. I noticed a man crouched behind the bigger kids' play structure. He was bald and looked kind of creepy, but I couldn't get a great look because of the darkness and the distance between us. I didn't think much of it and took a few more steps. Then, I noticed he was staring right at me. I got really nervous and stopped. I think he moved a little, and that's when I turned around and ran away as fast as I could. I glanced back while running and saw he was gone from the playground, so I'm pretty sure he was following me. I sprinted back to my house. Luckily, it was close, and quickly told my mom what happened. I swear I could hear footsteps running on the pavement behind me as I ran, but I was too scared to look back. I never saw that man again, but the memory still worries me occasionally. I think if I hadn't acted quickly, something bad might have happened. Fear gripped me as I moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Jake, you all right, man?" I asked once more. This time, he turned to me, his eyes wide and face pale, lit by the headlight. "Something's really wrong, Leo," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know what it is, but it feels like we're being messed with." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The sensation of being watched, the bizarre repetition of landmarks, the stopped clock. All of it pointed to something beyond our control or comprehension. I glanced back at the car and then around us, trying to spot anything unusual in the surrounding darkness. "Yeah, I feel it too," I admitted. "Let's get back in the car and keep moving. We can't stay out here." He nodded slowly, and we both climbed back into the car, urgency driving us to move quickly. As we buckled our seatbelts, I turned to him. "Keep an eye on the map and the road. We'll figure this out." Jake nodded again, his hands trembling as he unfolded the map. I started the car and pulled back onto the road, driving slower this time, trying to make sense of our surroundings. The dense woods seemed to close in around us, the darkness pressing against the car windows. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and our breathing. The tension was almost unbearable, the eerie stillness making every minute stretch on forever. Just as I was beginning to think we'd be stuck in this loop forever, a new sound broke through the night, a low, rhythmic drumming. "Do you hear that?" Jake whispered, his voice barely audible over the drumming sound. I nodded, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. The drumming grew louder, more insistent, as if something was approaching us. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but the road behind us was still empty. Suddenly, Jake pointed ahead. "Look, there's something up ahead." I squinted, trying to make out the shape in the darkness. As we drew closer, the headlights illuminated a large, weathered sign by the side of the road. It read, "Welcome to Echo, Nevada. Population 0. A chill ran down my spine as I read the sign. We had just passed the turnoff for Echo twice, and yet here it was again, directly in our path. The drumming was now deafening, a steady, pounding beat that seemed to reverberate through the car. "What's going on, Leo?" Jake asked, his voice rising in panic. I don't know, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But we need to stay calm and figure this out. I slowed the car to a crawl as we passed the sign, the headlights sweeping over an old, abandoned gas station and a cluster of dilapidated buildings. The place was a ghost town in every sense of the word, completely devoid of life. We're going to stop here, I said, making a snap decision. Let's check it out. Maybe we can find some answers. Jake looked at me like I was crazy, but nodded. All right, but let's make it quick. I parked the car by the gas station, and we both stepped out into the cool night air. The drumming sound had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt even more oppressive. We grabbed our flashlights from the car and cautiously approached the nearest building, an old general store with its windows boarded up. Stay close, I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. We pushed open the door, the hinges creaking loudly in the stillness. Inside, the store was a dusty, abandoned mess. Shelves were toppled over, and old cans and boxes littered the floor. As we moved through the building, our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing more of the same disarray. There's nothing here, Jake said, his voice tense. Let's get out of here. Just as we turned to leave, a faint light caught my eye from the back of the store. I motioned for Jake to follow me, and we carefully made our way towards it. Pushing open a door, we found ourselves in a small office. An old, flickering TV sat on a desk displaying static. What the hell? Jake muttered, stepping closer. I walked over to the desk, noticing an old journal lying open next to the TV. The pages were filled with frantic, scrawled notes. As I read through them, my blood ran cold. They're watching us. They won't let us leave. Time is a loop. We're trapped. I looked up at Jake, my face reflecting the horror I felt. We need to get out of here, now. We rushed back to the car, not bothering to be quiet. As we drove away from the ghost town, the drumming started again, louder and more insistent. I pushed the car faster, the speedometer climbing as we tore down the road. Look, Jake shouted, pointing ahead. In the distance, we saw the unmistakable glow of headlights moving along a highway. Relief washed over me as we sped towards it. Within minutes, we were merging onto the interstate, the familiar sight of other cars and the city lights in the distance bringing a sense of normalcy back. I glanced at the clock. It now read 4:30 a.m. Whatever had happened back there, we were finally free from it. Jake let out a shaky laugh. We made it, man. We're out. I nodded, feeling the tension slowly ebb away. Yeah, we did. Let's not do this again anytime soon. As we drove towards the city, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. We didn't know what had happened in that ghost town or why, but one thing was certain. We'd never forget that night, and we'd never take another late-night drive into the unknown again. I used to work in the radiology department of a hospital in Cardiff, Wales, UK, for about 3 years as an admin and clerical officer before moving to a role in medicine. During those 3 years, I witnessed a lot, from patients passing away in MRI scanners to bizarre x-rays involving meat thermometers. Nights were always the wildest. One time, armed police escorted a patient in after a city center knife fight. It turned out the other person involved was also there for an x-ray. A second altercation broke out right in front of me, with chairs and even a wheelchair getting thrown. I've seen things that were funny, stressful, sad, and downright bonkers. But one night, something truly scary happened. I usually started my night shifts at 7 p.m. and worked until 8:30 a.m. We did 3 nights in a row, followed by 4 days off. By the end of the 3rd night, you'd be ready to sleep for a week. This particular night was my first of the 3, so I wasn't tired at all. Everything started normally. I arrived, took over from the day staff, and logged into my computer. With plenty of downtime between patients, we'd usually set up our phones or tablets to watch movies or TV shows. The first few hours were uneventful, just a typical night in radiology. When my break came, I decided to head to the multi-faith chapel on the 5th floor, one of the most peaceful spots in the hospital during night shifts. To get there quickly, I had to walk through what we called the tunnels or catacombs. Dimly lit corridors with old abandoned rooms and creepy areas, including the morgue. This place is eerie even in the daytime, let alone at night. There have always been rumors of strange things happening down there. Ghost sightings, shadows following people, and even an attack by someone in an old nurse's uniform from the 70s. But none of that had ever fazed me. I'd been down there hundreds of times, and the worst thing I'd experienced was a sluice pipe dripping on my head. That night, however, was different. After watching some One Piece episodes during my downtime, a radiographer came to cover my break. I set off towards the tunnels, scanned my key card, and began my 15-minute journey. A couple of minutes in, I felt like someone was behind me. Given it was a busy hospital, I didn't think much of it. But then I heard panting like someone had just finished a sprint. I turned around, nothing. Thinking it was just the pipes or a generator, I continued. But the feeling of being watched persisted. Out of confusion and fear, I missed my turn towards the elevators and ended up in an unfamiliar, large section of the tunnels filled with old, decaying hospital furniture and equipment. Feeling lost and creeped out, I realized I might be in the back rooms. Everything looked the same, and panic started setting in. I clutched my chest and ran down the corridor, desperately trying to find a signpost. The sense of being watched grew stronger. Suddenly, I felt a forceful hit on my arm, like someone swung a baseball bat. I fell, pulling myself to a dusty wall, searching frantically for what had hit me. Then I saw it, a black mist with glowing red eyes, hovering 20 meters away. Was this the thing stalking me? I got up and sprinted, running through what felt like 100 corridors until I found a janitor. He saw my pale face and asked, "Did you see it too?" That was the last time I ever set foot in the tunnels. To this day, I hear rumors of strange occurrences. I'm not sure what I saw that night. Maybe I was tired or stressed, or maybe it was something real. Why else would the janitor ask if I had seen it too? Whatever it was, I'm not going back to find out. I'm 39 years old and living in Michigan. This is the story of the first and last time I experienced sleep paralysis. I had dated someone in the past who dealt with sleep paralysis and night terrors, so I knew what it entailed. But until you experience it yourself, you can never really understand the dread that overtakes you. It was like a lucid dream. In fact, for a long time afterward, I debated if it was a real event or not. It was the middle of the night. I had been asleep but was now lying, kind of propped up in bed at an angle with pillows behind my back. I am a grown man but still sleep with a nightlight. I had a Himalayan salt rock lamp on my nightstand, emitting a warm orange glow. As my senses came about, I realized that even though I was sitting up a bit, I had zero motor function in my body. I was paralyzed from head to toe. This alone was a terrifying notion. As someone who has been blessed with relatively good health through the years, not being able to move was shocking, to say the least. Upon this realization, I began to take stock of my surroundings, and as I scanned the room, I saw him. My bedroom is part of an addition to my home, therefore it is a rather oblong shape. My bed was pushed into the corner on one side of the room. On the other side, out of reach of the glowing night light, stood a shadowy figure. I would describe him the same as many others have described shadow people. He was nothing more than a silhouette, but was darker than all the darkness surrounding him. He stood tall with no features at all, but somehow I could feel his non-existent eyes fixated on me. He never moved, just stood there staring at me vacantly. Instant terror washed over me. I could sense his malice and hostility. Felt like he wanted to hurt me. My body went into fight or flight mode, and my adrenaline surged. But there was no moving. I remember trying to will my arms to function, but it was as if they were 10,000 pounds. I could not budge. My consciousness was my only tool. I wanted to scream at the entity. I kept trying to yell, "This is a house of safety. You are not welcome here." But it was as if my voice was caught in my throat. Trying to urge the words from my mouth was met with defeat over and over again. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Like a spell had been lifted, I gasped in a huge breath. My body seemed to tense and hug the bed's mattress. I could move again. I sat up all the way, and my head darted around, frantically looking for the shadow figure. It was gone, but it hadn't disappeared. It didn't dissolve into thin air. It merely was there 1 second and not there the next. My heart was beating rapidly, and I took in very deep breaths. I laid back in bed and tried to calm myself. That was a terrifying dream, I thought. But then again, was it? It didn't feel like I had been dreaming. My dreams are usually pretty bizarre. They're never in a typical setting from my life, like a bedroom. And it didn't feel like I had woken up from sleep. You know how you typically have that feeling, coming from dreamland to the waking world, that sense of clarity that you're back in reality. I didn't have that at all. I didn't wake up and open my eyes. It was just as if the event had finished, and now I was lying in bed alone. It was the oddest feeling and stuck with me for weeks after. Eventually, I decided it was not a dream at all. It just felt too real. And I had to wonder if the warm glow from my salt rock lamp was the only thing that night that kept the shadows at bay. My family and I have had some encounters before and after this particular event. My parents lived in a haunted apartment before moving into the house where I spent my childhood. My mom believed that the spirit from the apartment followed us and caused electrical disturbances, knocking, banging, and other odd occurrences. We weren't sure if it was the spirit from the apartment or my great-grandfather, who died tragically before my parents moved into their new house. These paranormal activities continued for the first 8 years of my life until my mom tried to call a priest. Interestingly, the priest didn't answer, but all the strange happenings ceased completely after that. When my grandmother passed away when I was 12, the house became incredibly active again. This continued until her funeral, after which it stopped completely. A couple of years later, some friends and I burned a Ouija board in the fireplace, which caused some creepy stuff to happen. But this story isn't about any of that. I just wanted to give you some background on how active this house was. I'm not sure if it was the house or my family that the phenomena were attracted to. I don't remember if I was 16 or 17, but I was sitting in my room watching videos on my console. Out of nowhere, I heard 3 evenly paced knocks on my door. This wasn't strange because I had been asking my parents to knock before coming into my room. I shouted, "What?" at my mom, who was the only other person in the house besides our dog, Coco. She didn't answer, so I got up to see what she wanted. As I approached my door, all the hair stood up on my body. Felt like there was something behind the door, and I was afraid of it. At that moment, I chalked it up to feeling paranoid, but it got much worse as I turned the knob. I ripped the door open, as if I was ripping off a bandage. When I looked, no one was there. I immediately went down the hall to the living room to find my mom folding laundry on the couch, only 15 feet away from my room. I asked her what she wanted, and she said she didn't want anything. I asked why she knocked on my door, and she said she was about to ask me why I was knocking on my own door. Both of us were creeped out, and we decided to try and recreate the knocking sound to see if it came from one of the doors leading outside or the walls around my room. It would be difficult for someone to knock on my wall because my room was the furthest off the ground, about 15 to 20 feet. I stood in my room alone while she knocked on all the other doors in the house. I knew this was probably a waste of time because I had lived there for over a decade and knew what it sounded like when someone knocked on my door compared to the front door. I especially remember Coco not wanting to go anywhere near the hallway that led to my room. A few days later, I was in my room again, possibly playing a game. My brother and his girlfriend were on the couch in the living room. I heard the knocks again around the same time of day, about 5 p.m., exactly 3, evenly paced. This time, I knew it was the same thing that knocked last time. I could feel that dread again. I moved as fast as I could out my door and into the living room to see my brother and his girlfriend. They were both visibly freaked out as I had told them about this a few days earlier, and they were both skeptical. My brother's girlfriend was the most surprised, as nothing like this had ever happened to her. That was the only and last time that has ever happened to me. I'm 22 now, and I've never experienced anything like that since. That incident changed me from an atheist to agnostic. After the other events as well, but this one was the tipping point. I can't be sure there's nothing else out there now, and I hope I'll have more experiences as my life goes on to confirm that there is actually something. I really want there to be something after death. In the summer of 2021, when I was 16, I attended an annual youth camp in Utah. As a member of the LDS Church, these camps were a regular part of my life. That year, we went to the north side of Bear Lake, closer to Idaho, for a 5-day trip in July. From the moment we arrived, something felt off, as if I wasn't supposed to be there. I dismissed it as just paranoia from being in the mountains. After setting up camp, we went on a hike along a steep, horseshoe-shaped trail. It took us until sunset to get back. Once we returned, I realized I had left my camera at the highest point of the trail, right in the middle. Embarrassed, I told everyone I was going to the bathroom and set off alone to retrieve it. The quietness was eerie. No crickets, just the sound of my footsteps. When I reached the spot, my camera was hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet up, even though I'm only 5 feet 7 inches. There was no way I could have placed it there myself. Feeling uneasy, I headed back to camp. As I walked, I felt like I was being watched. Then, I heard a metallic noise from the woods up the mountain. Our camp was at the base of this mountain, with a small plateau and a clearing at the peak of the trail. Beyond the plateau was steep forest, inaccessible to any vehicle. The noise wasn't an echo, and it made me freeze in fear. I stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably just a few minutes. Suddenly, I saw a huge creature walking towards me. It was at least 9 feet tall, with glowing eyes, not eye shine, but actual glowing eyes. Thick fur was a dark brown color. It didn't have human proportions and felt demonic. When I could finally move, I invoked Jesus' name, and the creature left. Shaken, I returned to camp, feeling like I had been gone for hours, though it had only been 30 minutes. I didn't tell anyone, fearing they wouldn't believe me. For the next 2 days, nothing unusual happened. But on the 4th day, we woke up to find all our food out and the cooler open. There were large footprints, 3 times the size of mine, and I wear a size 16. It was the same creature I had seen on the trail. Nothing else happened on that trip, but since then, I've been deeply affected. In early 2023, I even attempted to take my own life. Thankfully, I'm doing better now, though I'm still haunted by those eyes. I haven't gone camping since, though I've planned a trip with my great-uncles this year. They have been quite depressed since my grandpa, their older brother, passed away in May, and I feel obligated to join them. I remain a member of the LDS Church and firmly believe that Jesus Christ saved me that day. Have a great day. When I was 15, my best friend, whom I'll call Ari, was 14. We were part of a close-knit group of friends who enjoyed hanging out together. One rainy day, our friends, who were all skaters, decided to stay in due to the wet ground. However, Ari and I still wanted to go out and spend time together. We decided to meet up, though I can't recall if we left from our homes or if we were already together. We searched for a dry spot and settled on the handball courts at my old elementary school. The spot had a bench under a massive tree, providing some shelter. In front of us was a big slope leading down to a parking area. To exit, we had to walk down the slope, passing a huge basketball court and a playground. Across the street was a large patch of woods and another park where our group often hung out. That night was unusually quiet. As we sat on the bench, rolling up and playing music, I noticed a large figure sitting on a bench far away, near the playground. It was dark and foggy, but I could make out that it was a big man, facing us directly. I pointed him out to Ari, but she brushed it off, thinking I was being overly cautious. As we smoked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The man remained motionless, staring at us. Eventually, Ari agreed something was off. We decided to leave, but to exit, we had to walk down the ramp, getting closer to him. We held each other tightly as we walked, trying to stay calm. Halfway down the ramp, the man suddenly stood up and started running towards us. He was incredibly fast, with long strides. Ari and I let go of each other and bolted down the ramp into the street, screaming. I kept telling her not to leave me, terrified at the thought of one of us being caught. We ran towards our usual hangout spot, hoping to find our friends. The entire time, we could see the man chasing us. When we reached the park, it was deserted. Exhausted, we saw a man on a bike and begged for help, but he ignored us and rode away calmly, almost as if he didn't see us. We continued running until we reached an overpass with more streetlights. Only then did we realize the man was no longer behind us. We were safe but shaken. Now, nearly 30, I look back on that night often. Ari passed away about 5 years ago from a drug addiction. We shared many wild experiences, but this one stands out. When I told my husband about it, it gave us both goosebumps. I still wonder what would have happened if that man had caught up to us. I'm not sure what made him stop chasing us. Maybe he underestimated us, or perhaps he just wanted to scare us. I'll never know, but I wanted to share this story in honor of Ari. Our friends didn't believe us the next day, and Ari and I never spoke of it again, but I think about it often. A few years ago, I lived in an RV with my mom and brother. It was parked in my grandmother's driveway on her rural property with open spaces and trees, though there were neighbors down the road. During the summer, my mom would go to work while my brother and I stayed home. He often went over to my grandmother's trailer while I stayed in the RV. One day, while I was alone in the RV, I heard my brother knock on the door and call my name. I got a bad feeling, so I ignored him, thinking that if he really needed me, he could just come in since the door was unlocked. The blinds were closed, so I couldn't see him, and he didn't have a phone to contact me. After that, there was no further knocking or attempts to enter, and I didn't hear any footsteps walking away. This made me even more uneasy, so I stayed put until my mom returned home. When my mom and brother came back, I asked my brother what he needed. He was confused and said he had never come over. This really scared me, but I didn't bring it up again because I had no proof and didn't want to frighten anyone. A month later, my mom wouldn't let us outside alone after a doppelganger of my cousin was seen nearby. I still don't know if what I experienced was something paranormal or just my brother forgetting he had come to the RV, but it was definitely unsettling. I work as a behavioral health technician and started a new job back in September at a high-end drug and alcohol rehab facility. The facility is a massive mansion that resembles a cross between a grand estate and a small white house. It spans 3 levels, with 13 rooms each having private bathrooms and jacuzzi tubs. There's also a gym, 3 living rooms, a large commercial kitchen, a ballroom/yoga studio, a doctor's office, a large garden, and an elevator. My shift is from 11 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., so most of the time the clients are asleep, and it's just me and a nurse in this vast house. It's typically very quiet. My office is on the 2nd floor, and the nurse's office, along with the kitchen and a locked pantry, are on the 1st floor. Only the nurse has the key to the pantry. A couple of weeks ago, the nurse came upstairs, upset, saying I scared her by hiding in the pantry. I was confused because I hadn't left my office. When I told her that, she went pale and asked, "You weren't just in the pantry?" and said, "Knock, knock?" I reminded her that she had the only key. She walked out, and 10 minutes later, I heard her talking. I went to her office and found her praying on her knees in her native language. At 6 a.m., the chef and handyman arrived and asked how our night was. I jokingly said, "A ghost scared the nurse in the pantry." The chef replied, "Oh, that must have been Kay if it happened in the pantry." I was taken aback and asked what he meant. He explained that he had worked there for 15 years, and the place used to be a retirement home where many residents had passed away. He mentioned some of the residents and described where their spirits had been seen, assuring me they were always kind and not harmful. The nurse put in her 2-week notice and has since left. I've heard footsteps, seen lights flicker, and noticed fireplaces randomly turning on, but I haven't experienced anything as direct as the nurse did. My pay is significantly higher than average, and my supervisor says it's because they have trouble keeping night shift staff. I think it's because the place is haunted, but my pay is good enough to keep me from leaving. In 2019, my friend and I started attending a summer camp that conducts surveys each summer on various topics to improve our public speaking skills and gather opinions from people in the area. My friend and I teamed up with 2 counselors and went around town. Our last stop was a local store where we talked to many different people. The most memorable interaction was with an older man who, after answering our questions, asked for our names and personal details. At the time, we were both 13 and didn't have a strong sense of stranger danger, so we answered his questions without hesitation. A few days later, an account named @_Patsis sent us friend requests on social media. This account liked many of our old posts, commented with fire and rose emojis, and called us attractive. It escalated to the point where the account started sending inappropriate pictures. We ended up blocking the account, and a few days later it was permanently deleted. We thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. When we returned to school in August, we had nearly forgotten about the incident. However, we received another friend request from someone named @Patsis on both our social media accounts. We immediately blocked the account again, but not before it commented lewd things on my childhood photos, mentioning my hair and clothes in a disturbing way. After that, we talked to our parents about the situation. They advised us to keep our accounts private. The police suggested we delete the app entirely, but being teenagers, we didn't do that. For the next couple of years, until the end of 2021, this man continued to send friend requests from different accounts with similar variations of the name. It became increasingly creepy in early 2022 when accounts with the names and pictures of our friends started appearing in our notifications. Thinking they were our friends, we accepted the requests, only to have our posts liked or commented on by these accounts and receive inappropriate messages. We blocked these accounts as well. This cycle continued, with fake accounts using friends' information to friend us repeatedly. We eventually stopped adding people from our school altogether, even real friends. The final incident occurred in the summer of 2022. The fake accounts had stopped about 2 months prior, and I decided to accept a friend request that seemed legitimate from a school friend. My friend was still wary, but I decided to give it a shot, agreeing to delete our social media accounts and create new ones if it turned out to be another fake. At first, the account behaved normally, liking a few new posts and stories but not commenting or sending inappropriate messages. We thought the ordeal was finally over. However, strange things began happening. Whenever I posted a picture of me and a friend at the park, a white truck would appear in the parking lot, eerily close to my car. The truck's lights would stay on, pointed at us, making us anxious. We would walk around the park, waiting for the truck to leave before heading back to my car. This happened several times, and I started to notice the truck everywhere I posted about. One time, I noticed the driver of the truck was the same older man from our survey trip back in 2019. It was unsettling to see him again, especially since we met him in a different town. This stalking continued until late July 2023, on the last day of our summer camp. I was 17 at the time and drove some campers home. After posting last day campfire pictures, my phone became almost unusable due to glitches. That night, as we drove home, a white truck appeared again, flashing its lights and honking. It tried to run us off the road, but I managed to lose it by speeding through familiar backroads. After dropping off the campers, I called my best friend Anne, who had left camp earlier with her baby. She was crying and shared a similar story. She had stopped at a gas station to tend to her baby when a white truck blocked her in. She managed to escape by driving over a curb and speeding home. Her brothers were outside when she arrived, and the truck sped off. The next day, we reported the incidents to the police. Eventually, the man and his accomplice in the white truck were found attempting to kidnap a child in a nearby town. Our reports, along with those of others who had similar experiences, helped identify the man who had stalked us for years. It took a while, but we no longer have to worry about them. I spent around 15 years working in the truck stop industry. The stories I'm about to share all happened at the same location, where I worked for less than 18 months. This place seemed to attract some of the strangest occurrences I've ever encountered. If people are interested, I have more stories from other locations, but this one had the most frequent strange happenings. I was given the chance to help open a new location, and with a significant raise and promotion on the table, I accepted. It's been about 5 years since that location opened, and I don't think there's a single original employee left from the 60+ we hired before the grand opening. On the opening day, shortly after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a florist delivering flowers accidentally dropped them on her foot, injuring herself and bleeding at the entrance. Within a week of opening, we had a mysterious issue with water and sewage backing up through all the drains, including those outside. It wasn't caused by rain or any obvious flooding, and the problem disappeared as suddenly as it began, leaving plumbers scratching their heads. A few months after opening, a severe storm hit, knocking out our high-rise interstate sign and causing a 7-hour power outage. While most staff were sent home, a few stayed in case power was restored. During that time, a local employee mentioned rumors that the property had once been a Native American burial ground. Whether or not this was true, the increasingly strange events certainly made us wonder. Despite precautions, the power surge damaged several pieces of critical equipment, causing operational headaches for weeks. The first winter brought unusually cold weather, so extreme that we had to use space heaters to keep the servers from freezing. We also faced issues with frozen pipes, especially in the truck care center and the restaurant. 6 months after opening, we had our first fatality. A truck driver came in for a shower, and after an unusual amount of time passed, an employee checked and found him deceased, apparently from a stroke. The incident deeply affected the staff member who discovered him, and although the company provided support, she left shortly after. A few weeks later, one of the strangest incidents occurred. As I was temporarily managing the restaurant side, an assistant manager showed me surveillance footage of a man in a sedan acting suspiciously. He parked near a maintenance shed, left a trash bag on a compactor, drove away, then returned later to throw the bag onto the shed roof before leaving for good. An employee retrieved the bag and found it contained papers listing addresses across the U.S., each with a note describing where bodies could allegedly be found on these properties. We immediately contacted the police, but the local chief, with limited resources, seemed unconcerned. We hoped he would pass the information to higher authorities. A couple of weeks later, a man's body was found at a nearby dump. The details were unclear due to the nature of the site. Not long after, another truck driver died on our property. During this time, another severe storm destroyed our interstate sign again. We also had an alarming incident where a driver left children's clothing and ratchet straps near a diesel pump. After reviewing the footage and contacting the police, it turned out the driver had simply cleaned out his truck after dropping off his child at home, leaving the items behind without thinking about the implications. A few months past the 1-year mark, the state DOT had to shut down the nearby interstate ramps for repairs, drastically affecting our business. During this downtime, I was promoted and transferred to another location. I kept in touch with my former boss and colleagues for a while, hearing about more strange incidents, including a man wielding a machete and a violent altercation involving a customer and a teenage cashier. Over time, I lost touch with my former coworkers as they moved on. Whether the strange events continued, I can't say for sure, but the experience was enough to make me wary of truck stops. Haunted? Portal to something else? I don't know, but it's certainly a place I now avoid. We noticed faint flashes of red in the sky, almost like someone was signaling with a flare from space. The sight was odd but intriguing, and we all joked about UFOs as we set up our tents. There were 5 of us, old friends since middle school, celebrating our high school graduation with a camping trip. The flashes disappeared as we continued chatting and setting up camp. Dave, who used to work with me at the local gas station, finished setting up his tent first and went to gather branches for a fire. Eric, always meticulous, was still poring over his tent manual. We weren't as close, but I remembered him helping me out with math homework once. Ava and my cousin Sally were teaming up to set up their tent, chatting as usual. Ava's younger brother often wanted to tag along with us in the past, so I knew everyone here well. As Dave left to find branches, we pulled out folding chairs and arranged them around the fire pit. As the sun set, an eerie silence fell over the forest, and we noticed that Dave hadn't returned yet. The stillness was unsettling. Even the usual forest sounds were absent. Just then, Dave reappeared, the sound of rustling bushes announcing his arrival. We were all seated in our chairs, bundled up in jackets as the temperature dropped. Dave looked puzzled as he said, "You guys couldn't even save a chair for me?" We had set up 5 chairs, yet all were occupied. I tried to make sense of it, but my mind felt foggy, as if something was clouding my thoughts. I knew there were only 5 of us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The silence was thick, and I could see the same confusion on everyone's faces. Eric was fidgeting, glancing around the group, trying to identify an extra person who wasn't supposed to be there. But everyone looked familiar except for, "It's fine, I'll grab a chair myself," Dave said, breaking the tension. I offered to help, and as we walked towards the tents, I whispered, "How many people are here?" Dave hesitated, counting the chairs again. "There should be 5, right? But there's 5 chairs already set up," he replied, sounding unsure. My head felt like it was swimming. I couldn't focus on the problem at hand. It was as if my mind was resisting the thought that something was wrong. As we returned to the fire, we found 2 empty chairs. Everything seemed to make sense again, though we all knew it hadn't before. Sally suggested that we were just tired from the day's hike and needed rest. Ava brought out drinks, and we tried to relax, huddled around the fire for warmth. As we reminisced, a chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, I realized something crucial. Who started the fire? I asked, cutting into the conversation. Everyone looked around, bewildered. No one had an answer. The unease grew as we tried to recall who had done it. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "No, I didn't start it." Sally, looking over at me, said, "I think the person behind Jenny did it." My heart skipped a beat as I whipped around, but there was only darkness beyond the firelight. The forest felt ominous, as if it were closing in on us. Sally quickly backtracked. "Wait, I don't know." She was clearly frightened. Ava tried to comfort her, but it was evident everyone was on edge. Ava suggested we leave, but the forest was too dark to navigate safely. Eric proposed we stay together and leave at first light. We decided to sleep in pairs, even though we only had one-person tents, to ensure no one was alone. As we set up, Eric seemed distressed, insisting there were 6 of us. We reassured him, but a nagging doubt remained. When I tried to count everyone, my head throbbed painfully. I ended up vomiting from the stress, and Dave helped me to our tent. We arranged our tents in a U-shape for safety, and as we settled in, I took one last look at the forest. The sight of someone standing near the spare tents made my skin crawl, but exhaustion quickly overtook me. I was jolted awake by Ava's scream. Dave and I rushed out to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. Eric was inside his sleeping bag, but something was terribly wrong. His body was contorted in a grotesque position, his face frozen in pain. Dark blood stained the fabric. Ava was in shock, and Sally was hysterical. Dave urged us to run, grabbing his flashlight. We fled the campsite, sticking close together. As we ran, Ava tripped and hurt her ankle. Before we could react, someone dragged her into the woods. Sally tried to follow, but Dave stopped her. We had to keep moving. The sounds of a struggle faded behind us, and I felt a crushing sense of helplessness. There were 3 of us on the trail now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was right behind us. "Dave, who's following us?" I gasped. He turned to look, fear and then anger flashing across his face. "You go ahead," he said, handing me the car keys and turning to face whoever was behind us. I ran, driven by fear, until I reached the car park. I jumped into the car and sped away, not stopping until I was far from the forest. I'm writing this from a rest stop. My phone finally has service, and I've called for help. The police are on their way, but I'm not sure they believe my story. As I wait, the dawn is breaking, and I'm about to check on the person who's been silently sitting in my back seat. About 3 years ago, when I was 17 and my friend was 16, we decided to have a bonfire behind my barn. It was an ideal night. No wind, just cool enough for hoodies, and the fire was large, illuminating the area around us. We were having fun, joking around, and decided to walk about 500 feet down to my pond, partly because we could see the fire's reflection on the water. As we walked, we joked about seeing a mysterious creature or something unusual coming out of the woods. I've always been curious about the paranormal and often joked about wanting to witness something strange, just so I could record it. My friend, however, was always more on edge when I brought up these topics, which made it amusing to me, especially since we were surrounded by woods and farmland. At the pond, we noticed something shiny about 20 feet to our right. My friend remarked, "Where did that giant rock come from?" I looked over and knew right away it wasn't a rock or anything else that should have been there, as I had mowed the area a few hours earlier. The only things around us were 2 large trees. As we got closer, I kept asking, "What is that?" My friend started to get more anxious, also asking, "What is that?" I was in total awe. By this point, I was about 5 feet away trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't a rock or a tree stump, and there should have been nothing there. The object was about 3 feet long and maybe 2 feet high. Then it hit me. It looked like something crouched down, as if in a fetal position. I could make out what seemed like a neck and torso, with wrinkled, grayish skin and a few white hairs. I repeated, "What is this thing?" My friend, now terrified, grabbed me and pulled me away. We ran back to my house, constantly looking back to make sure nothing was following us. Inside, we told my mom, who responded with a skeptical, "Oh, really?" Determined to find out what it was, we grabbed a flashlight and drove down to the spot in my car. We shined the headlights all around, but there was nothing there. We even drove through the woods, but still found nothing. The next morning, we went back to check for any signs or footprints, but there was nothing to indicate anything had been there. The one thing I regret is not pulling out my phone to record what we saw. At that moment, it was as if my mind went blank. I didn't even think to take out my phone. To this day, my friend and I still wonder what it was that we saw. I'm 21 years old now, but this happened when I was younger. My family and I had just moved into a new house and started exploring it. My 3 sisters immediately ran upstairs to choose their rooms, while I stayed downstairs with my parents to check out the kitchen and dining room. My mother then suggested I go upstairs to pick my room, so I eagerly ran up, excited to see my new space. As I reached the top of the stairs, I found my sisters standing there, all silently staring ahead. I followed their gaze and saw a dark figure hunched over. It had no face, and I couldn't see any legs. It was just a black, cloaked form. Suddenly, it moved quickly into the middle room and shut the door. My sisters bolted downstairs to tell our parents, but I stayed, watching to make sure it didn't come out. My father ran upstairs, saw where I was looking, and rushed into the room. I followed him, but the room was empty. There was no sign of anyone or anything, no evidence that anything had been there. After that, our parents decided that we should all sleep in the same room, which was my mother's room. That night, I remember being the last to fall asleep. As I closed my eyes, I had a dream, or perhaps it was something more, where I was watching all of us sleep from a corner of the room. I felt completely immobilized, unable to do anything but watch. Then, I looked down at my hands, only they weren't mine. They were long, black, with long nails. Suddenly, it felt like I was being forced to look up at myself, and then I charged at my own body. I woke up to find the room filled with people, including paramedics. Confused, I asked what was happening and how everyone had gotten there. They told me I had been screaming the whole time, but they wouldn't let me explain what I had experienced. They put me on a stretcher and took me to the ambulance, but as we were leaving, I saw that same dark figure in the corner. The strangest part is that no one else remembered seeing it or knew what I was talking about. I still wonder what that figure was and what really happened that night. I live in a small, quiet town where not much happens. It's a place where everyone knows each other, and the biggest excitement is the annual summer fair. One night, I had stayed up late working on a project for work. My desk is positioned right by the window, giving me a view of the dimly lit street outside. Around 2 a.m., I decided to take a break. I stretched and walked over to the kitchen to grab a drink. When I returned to my desk, I noticed something unusual. There was a figure standing across the street, directly opposite my house. The streetlight cast just enough light to outline a tall man, standing perfectly still. I tried to shake off the unease that prickled at the back of my neck. It's probably just someone out for a late-night walk, I told myself. But as I sat back down and glanced up again, he was still there, and he was staring right at my window. A chill ran down my spine. I closed my laptop, thinking maybe it was time to call it a night. I pulled the curtains shut, trying to block out the unsettling sight of the man in the window. But curiosity gnawed at me. Who was he? I peered through a small gap in the curtains. He hadn't moved. He was still there, staring. My heart pounded in my chest. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? There's a man standing on the street, doing nothing, trying to ignore the unease. I turned off the lights and went to bed. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind howling outside, my mind racing. Who was he? What did he want? Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamt of that man, standing outside, his eyes boring into mine. In the dream, I felt paralyzed, unable to move or scream as he slowly made his way to my front door. I woke up drenched in sweat, the morning light filtering through the curtains. I hesitated before pulling them open, half expecting to see the man still there. But the street was empty, the only evidence of last night being the faint, lingering dread in my chest. I went about my day trying to push the memory of the man from my mind. By the time evening rolled around, I had almost convinced myself that it was all a figment of my imagination or a trick of the light. But as night fell and I sat down at my desk again, a sense of dread settled over me. I couldn't help but glance out the window. He was back, the same tall figure, standing in the exact same spot, staring at my window. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. This time, I wasn't going to ignore it. I dialed the police and reported the suspicious figure. The officer on the other end assured me they would send someone to check it out. I watched from the window, my breath fogging up the glass. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up and 2 officers got out. But something strange happened. They walked past the man. He just stood there, staring at my window. The officers looked around, confused. They circled the area, shining their flashlights into the shadows. One of them knocked on my door to inform me they found nothing. I was confused and told them the man was right there in the street, but when I pointed, the man was gone. That night, sleep was impossible. Every noise, every shadow made me jump. I kept the curtains tightly shut, afraid of what I might see if I looked outside. Days turned into weeks, and the man didn't return. Slowly, I began to relax, though the memory of those nights never left me. One evening, as I was tidying up, I noticed smudges on the window, right where I had been sitting that night. Fingerprints, large, distinct fingerprints pressed against the glass, as if someone had been standing right outside my window, watching me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The man hadn't been across the street. I don't stay up late anymore. I keep my curtains closed, and I've moved my desk away from the window. But every night, I can't help but feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. And I sometimes see glimpses of him in the corner of my eye when passing the windows, but I haven't had a good look at him since the police incident. I made a pact with the devil and kept my soul, but it seems the agreement might not be as concluded as I believed. This is my tale. I once served as a dedicated soldier in a seemingly endless war, always on the front lines, taking immense risks without ever getting injured, earning the nickname the Iron Man. But everything shifted when a peace treaty was signed at a significant cost. New political powers emerged from the treaty, and soon our country was governed by the very people we once fought against. It felt like they won the war with diplomacy rather than force. Corruption riddled this new government, and the populace was too worn out to resist. Veterans received no support, jobs were scarce for the lower classes, and social assistance vanished as politicians embezzled the country's wealth. I, like many others, struggled to find work, lacked a home, and seldom had food. One day, I stumbled upon an apple tree at a crossroads. Starving, I picked an apple, hoping it would give me the strength to face another day. As I took my first bite, I noticed a dark shadow moving along the ground. The hairs on my neck stood up. Looking up, I saw an eccentric man standing before me. He wore a green jacket and leaned on a golden walking stick adorned with sapphires. Despite his dignified appearance, I realized he had goat hooves for feet. Terrified, I jumped up, dropping the apple, and reached for my rifle. But the man began to speak. "I know what you need," he said. Curiosity halted me. The man leaned forward on his walking stick and smirked. "I will give you money and property, as much as you can squander in your lifetime." Confused, I stammered. "Who? What? What are you talking about?" Ignoring my questions, he continued, however, pausing dramatically. "Before I give you everything your heart desires, I must know if you are fearless. I don't want to give my money to a coward." Challenging my bravery got my attention. A soldier and fear, how can those go together? "I can handle any test of bravery." Grinning widely, he said, "Very well, look behind you." Turning around, I saw a large, growling bear with red eyes charging towards me. Startled, I quickly aimed my rifle and shot the bear in the snout, killing it. The man grinned ear to ear. "Very good. You do not lack courage. But there is one more condition you must fulfill." Realizing who he was, I interrupted. "As long as I can keep my soul and salvation, then I'll consider your offer." The devil inspected me closely, then smirked. "A counter offer? How intriguing," he continued. "For the next 7 years, you are neither to wash, comb your hair, cut your nails, nor pray. I will give you a jacket and a cloak to wear. If you die during these 7 years, you are mine. If you survive, you will be free, and I will bestow riches upon you for a lifetime." Desperate, I agreed. The devil handed me a green jacket, which would always provide money, and a bear pelt for a cloak. My new name for the next 7 years would be Bearskin. As I traveled, doing good deeds, my appearance deteriorated. By the 3rd year, I looked like a filthy, overgrown beast. People avoided me, but I managed to help many in need. In the 4th year, I reached a town where I helped an old man and his daughters, giving them money and staying with them. One daughter, Adriana, grew close to me. We fell in love, and I proposed, asking her to wait 2 more years for me to fulfill my deal. After 7 years, I returned to the crossroads. The devil cleaned me up and reluctantly fulfilled his end of the bargain. I returned to Adriana, but tragedy struck. Her sister, possessed by the devil, attacked and killed Adriana. In the chaos, the devil claimed 3 souls. Years later, I saw the sister outside my apartment, wearing the familiar green jacket. I thought I escaped with just heartbreak, but the devil's grip is inescapable. Unsure of my fate, I record my story, uncertain of what tomorrow will bring. My uncle has worked as a marine biologist for 50 years. Now in his 60s, he has spent the last 25 years teaching marine biology at a university. His area of expertise includes the North and Mid-Atlantic Ocean. Growing up, whenever we visited him in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, he would share numerous stories about his deep-sea expeditions. Before he became a teacher, he was primarily a researcher. Each story was captivating and filled with wonder. The story I'm about to tell is the only one that makes me question what really exists in the deep ocean. To maintain anonymity, I'll refer to him as Uncle Jay or just Jay. This story begins when Uncle Jay was preparing for an expedition to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The research vessel was medium-sized, about 80 meters long, equipped with a crane, and crewed by roughly 20 men, with about 15 marine biologists of various specialties on board. It was early summer in the late 90s, though I'm not sure of the exact date, and Uncle Jay was around 30 at the time. The weather was perfect for loading the vessel. The ocean was calm, and the weather was beautiful. They would be at sea for the next month and a half, with all weather forecasts looking promising. Once the ship was loaded, they embarked on their journey, taking about a week to reach the ridge. The main objective of this expedition was to examine and possibly identify new species of sea life in that region, and to study the living habits of known species. Without submarines, they devised an intriguing plan to discover new species. Using the crane on board, they attached cow carcasses to the hook and lowered them near the ocean floor. Cameras and lights positioned near the hook would observe any sea life that might consume the carcass. They had about 10 carcasses and planned to start in the northern part, lowering the carcasses for a few days before moving south along the ridge, repeating the process. During each deployment, the ship would power down and drift. If they drifted away from the ridge, they would slowly move back into position. Due to budget constraints, the cameras did not provide a live feed, so all footage had to be thoroughly examined after retrieval. About 48 hours of footage to sift through each time. After about a week with no new discoveries but valuable footage of rarely seen sea life consuming the cows, everything was going according to plan. The seas were calm, and everyone on board was enjoying their time. They were on their 5th cow carcass around 5 p.m. and lowered it into the water. This portion of the ridge was about 3,500 meters deep, pushing the limit of their crane's cable. 2 marine biologists were required to monitor the crane and their location relative to the ridge at all times. My uncle and another biologist drew the short straw and had the overnight watch, swapping out around 9 a.m. Uncle Jay said it was an uneventful night, with him and the other biologist chatting and bouncing theories off each other. Around 7 a.m., just as the sun was rising, all was calm. Almost too calm, Jay remarked. They hadn't drifted off course throughout the night, and the ocean was like glass. Much of the crew was beginning to rise as well. But then something shocking happened. The crane, angled off the right side of the ship, suddenly caused the 80-meter vessel to list rapidly to the right side. It felt as if something had grabbed the hook and was pulling it deeper. The immediate panic was unlike anything my uncle had experienced. It felt like the ship might capsize. They sounded the ship's alarm to notify the crew of the emergency. Once they regained their faculties after the initial shock, my uncle ordered the other biologists to start reeling in the crane. With the long cabling, it would take about 20 minutes to fully reel in. The winch struggled, and the ship leaned more into the water. Just as water began to pour over the right side, the ship smacked back to an upright position, sending my uncle flying into some containers. Several crew members were injured, but nothing was life-threatening. As the crane retracted over the next 20 minutes, the crew assessed the injured and any damages. My uncle was uninjured despite being thrown around. Waiting for the line to come up was the longest 20 minutes of his life. Everyone was in complete shock at what had just happened. 2 minutes of chaos, then calm again. When the crane returned to the surface, the cow carcass was completely gone, and the large metal hook was slightly bent. A few cameras were missing, but not all. The completely missing cow carcass was the most intriguing part. As in every other case, it was never gone entirely. The vessel's captain decided to head back shortly after this incident, much to the biologist's disappointment, including my uncle, who wanted to find out what caused this. However, several onboard generators were damaged in the impact, essential to the ship's operation, so they had to return. My uncle believed the captain and crew were terrified, and rightfully so. During the week-long journey back, the biologists examined the footage to identify the cause. The footage was normal until the cameras suddenly went black, not because they stopped recording, but because something covered them. The The timestamps matched the incident. After 2 minutes, the lights came back on, revealing a cloud of sediment kicked up from the ocean floor, enveloping the camera views. They ruled out the hook snagging on the bottom but never saw what caused this. That's how the story ends, without an answer or explanation. They returned to port and reported their findings, but to my knowledge, nothing ever came of it. My uncle has his theories about what could have caused this, ranging from a hungry sperm whale to a giant squid or some unknown massive sea creature. Whatever it was, it must have been huge to devour a cow carcass in under 2 minutes and nearly capsize an 80-meter research vessel. While this story is outlandish and hard to believe, I have no reason to doubt it. My uncle has never told any similar stories. This is the only one that hints at sea monsters and the unknown. It makes you wonder what could really be out there, lurking in the deep ocean. Two years ago, some strange events unfolded in New Orleans that I haven't shared with anyone. My friends and family, like me, are skeptics when it comes to the paranormal, but I have no logical explanation for what happened. A few years back, I took various jobs in hospitality to explore the USA. In 2022, I landed a position at a small hostel in New Orleans. This hostel, a charming Victorian house on the edge of the French Quarter, became my base for exploring the city and Louisiana. The house had its quirks, as old buildings do. With settling would sometimes mimic footsteps upstairs. Guests in room 3 often complained about the cold, despite adjusting the air conditioning. The front door's Yale lock would work inexplicably, even after changing the batteries and the lock itself. A few weeks into my stay, things started to get weird. It began with a candlestick. Autumn had arrived, and with the peak season over, we decided to deep clean the house, including the top floor, which was closed to guests. While dusting the top of a bookshelf, I accidentally knocked something off. It landed in a cardboard box, preventing damage to the wooden floors. Covered in cobwebs and rust, it turned out to be an ornate candlestick. I searched for its pair but found nothing. Excited to share my find, I showed it to a coworker, Megan. She found it creepy and suggested throwing it out, but I decided to clean it up instead. I never found the second candlestick, but I placed a candle in it and displayed it on the dining room table. Around this time, my sleep became disturbed. I didn't have nightmares but woke up every morning with a feeling of dread, like the moment after a heartbreak. This unease persisted without any clear cause. One morning, the candlestick was missing from the dining table. I found it under the table, suspecting it had been moved by a drunk guest. The next day, it was across the room, with the rust creeping back up the base. A few days later, after an upsetting evening when none of my coworkers agreed to switch shifts, I found the candlestick hidden in a storage closet. Frustrated, I confronted Megan, suspecting her since I had seen her standing by it one night. She denied moving it, and I felt an irrational surge of anger. Embarrassed by my reaction, I decided to move the candlestick to room 4, which was unoccupied for a few days. One night, I was studying after my shift when a guest from the dormitory upstairs asked me to check on a crying person. She thought it came from the room next to hers. When I realized she meant room 4, I assured her it was unoccupied but agreed to check it out. Inside, I found no one, but the lampshade was torn, and the candlestick lay on the floor among shards of glass, as if it had been thrown. Days later, the guest who reported the crying checked out early, looking exhausted and pale. I couldn't find any reason for her distress. Eventually, I took the candlestick to my room, planning to return it to the dining table. That night, I woke up to noises and felt the bed depress as if someone had sat on it. Paralyzed with fear, I knew it wasn't human. The weight lifted without any sound of the door opening or closing. I decided to leave New Orleans. I slept with the lights on, always feeling like someone was behind me. My anxiety peaked when the hostel keys went missing, and I irrationally blamed myself. Reviewing the security footage, I saw myself taking the keys at 1:33 a.m., an act I had no memory of. The horror of seeing myself doing something unknown and out of control was too much. I left that day and, since then, haven't experienced anything unusual. Life has returned to normal, but the memory of those events, especially seeing myself on that footage and feeling the bed shift, still haunts me. New Orleans and the hostel were beautiful, but the experience remains the most terrifying of my life. This happened last night, November 15th, 2023, around 3:30 a.m. I was in my living room, relaxing on my couch, watching grown-ups. Suddenly, I heard someone outside fiddling with my doorknob. My heart dropped. I immediately grabbed a knife from my TV drawer, which I keep for this exact reason. As the doorknob continued to rattle, I bolted upstairs. I grew more terrified because the glass on my door could easily be broken to gain entry. Keep in mind that I live in a low-income area and don't have security cameras. My home is a small, two-story loft without another door to barricade. The upstairs is an open area without a door. I dialed 911 while the locks were still making noises. I whispered as loudly as I could to the operator, describing how someone was still trying to break in. The sounds of the rattling locks are still vivid in my mind. I don't know if this person was attempting to pick the locks or just trying to scare me by jiggling the doorknob. I felt the air move from the door upstairs, but the door wouldn't open. I was too scared to open the door or the blinds to see outside. My heart was racing as the operator told me that the police were on their way and ended the call. I started hyperventilating. Finally, the noises stopped. I stayed inside and upstairs, looking out the window but seeing no one because it was so dark. The police arrived 20 minutes later and asked if I was on drugs, but I was completely sober. I hadn't consumed any substances that day because of a basketball game. I occasionally drink lightly, sometimes heavily, about 3 times a week, but no other substances, and I haven't touched alcohol since this incident because it was so frightening. I feel like I need to stay alert. By this point, I was shaking. The police did a perimeter check and left, advising me not to stay there that night. They suggested that next time I should try to get a good look at the person. They mentioned it could have been a homeless person thinking the house was vacant, but how could it be vacant with the sound of a movie playing in the living room? Someone was trying to harm me. It's scary to think what could have happened if I hadn't locked the front door. After the police left, I had a major panic attack and fainted. I went into a kind of shock. I didn't sleep at all that night. Once the sun came up, I went outside and noticed that trash was scattered everywhere, likely due to stray cats getting into the trash can. I started to think, could one of those cats have done this? I've seen videos of cats trying to turn doorknobs, but for 10 minutes, then I considered other animals or even a person trying to spook me. From a paranormal standpoint, I wondered if something otherworldly was involved. The police didn't really check the locks, and there was no clear evidence of tampering. There were tiny scratches on the wall, but nothing that indicated someone had been messing with the locks. It was more like someone tried to stick a credit card in. I started thinking, was someone just messing with me as a joke? Not actually trying to get in, but playing a weird mind game? Could it have been something extraterrestrial? At this point, I'm just paranoid, right? Someone was definitely trying to get into my home. I'm now spending a few days at my mom's house, feeling very spooked. I haven't slept in more than 46 hours. I'm a relatively happy, albeit lonely, 23-year-old guy. My mental health isn't the best, but I've never been diagnosed with anything. Could it be possible that I experienced an auditory hallucination? Is there any chance that I might be imagining someone attempting to break in? This is a true account of an experience that left me shaken for days. I'll try to keep it brief while including all the important details. My name is Bauman, I'm 20 years old, and I'm from a small village in the mountains of northern Iran, surrounded by a vast forest. The story takes place 2 years ago when I was 18, 2021. It was a partly cloudy day, and I decided to go for my usual walk in the forest. The main path of the forest passes behind our house, so it wasn't a long walk, but it led deep into the forest along a dirt road with trees stretching as far as the eye can see. It was later than usual, around 5:30 or 6 p.m., and it was getting dark, but being familiar with the path, I wasn't worried and thought I'd be back soon. About 20 minutes into the walk, it kept getting darker. I reached a part of the path that was a straight road, about 1,000 feet long, and I could somewhat see the end of it. As I walked down that road, I saw a dark figure at the far end, just a black shape standing in the middle of the path. With the fading light, I wasn't sure what I was looking at, especially from that distance. My first thought was that it was probably a cow, as many people in the village have farms and sometimes let their cows roam the woods in large groups. But I wondered why this one was alone and, more importantly, why it wasn't moving. Despite my uncertainty and growing fear, I kept walking. Maybe it was curiosity or not wanting to seem scared if it was a prank or someone from the village. I don't really know what I was thinking at that moment. I remember staring at the figure without blinking as I walked towards it. The thing that unnerved me the most was why it wasn't moving at all. As I got closer, I began to see a shape. A tall figure with long, skinny legs. At one point, I thought I saw a third leg or maybe a stick in its hands, but it was so blurry. I kept walking, my heart pounding in my chest. When I was about 60 feet away from the figure, I stopped, staring at it as it stood motionless. I didn't have the courage to say anything. I remember thinking, forget it, and turned around to walk away. As I walked back, I kept glancing over my shoulder, paranoid that I would see the figure move. But each time I looked, it was still standing there, eventually fading from view as I got further away. It was almost completely dark by this point. After a few turns, I calmed down a bit and didn't feel as worried. I didn't run home like a maniac, but kept walking normally, trying not to think about what had just happened. I took out my phone to call a friend and talk until I got home. Just before making the call, I looked back one last time, something I wish I hadn't done. I saw the same blurry black figure standing still in the middle of the road, about 50 feet away, looking at me. I didn't wait to see if it would move this time. I ran for my life, not looking back once, and didn't stop until I got home. When I arrived, my hands and feet were shaking, something I'd never experienced before and hoped never to experience again. My family was worried. After I told them what happened, they said I must have been hallucinating, but I could see in their eyes that they were as shocked and scared as I was. I've never experienced anything like it since and have never mentioned it to anyone until now. This experience will forever be in my mind and haunt me. When I was around 8 to 10 years old, I can't remember the exact age, my sister and I were at a party with our extended family. Being Mexican, our parties were always bustling with lots of family members, their kids, and friends, so there were about 20 to 25 people there. The party was held at my uncle's parents' house. The driveway was used for tables and food, and the front yard was where all the kids gathered to play with the bouncy house. I was playing in the front. My memory is a bit hazy from all those years ago, and I remember standing in the driveway near the bouncy house, looking up and seeing a large disc covered with lights. I don't know how long I stared at it, but eventually, after watching it for a bit, it zoomed off. I remember it leaving a trail of light behind, similar to the hyperdrive scenes in Star Wars. At the time, I might have dismissed this as my imagination blending movies with real life, but then I turned and saw my sister staring up at the sky as well. I asked her if she'd seen what I had seen, and she confirmed it. The strangest part, looking back, is that no one else seemed to notice this. There were at least 10 other kids playing around us, family members partying in the back, and some adults near the front gate supervising the kids. Yet only my sister and I saw it. Strangely, we didn't think much of it at the time. We joked about the UFO being some kind of tourist attraction or ride, like those at Disneyland. We didn't view it as a supernatural experience or anything out of the ordinary. Two kids seeing a UFO that no one else saw. It sounds like one of those stories where only a couple of kids witnessed something extraordinary. But I still vividly remember what I saw. Years later, we were at home, and I asked my sister if she remembered that night. To my astonishment, she did, recalling the event in similar detail. Us too by the bouncy house, the UFO, its departure, everything. Even years later, we both vividly remember that UFO. Why us, though? Why did no one else see it? We have no reason to be the only ones to witness it. How did no one else notice something so obvious, just about 100 feet above us? Mexicans aren't that oblivious, even when partying. It was just a single occurrence, never happening again in my life. I'm not traumatized or afraid of it. It just happened, and I found it interesting enough to fantasize about it as a kind of ride. I try to think I made it up, but how do I explain my sister seeing it too? Did we share some telekinetic or psychic connection where we both imagined a UFO at the same time? That seems unlikely. My friends and I, Rob, 13M, Brad, 14M, and myself, 14M, were having a sleepover. Around 1 a.m., we decided to sneak out, looking for some teenage adventure. We didn't stay out long, just walked around the local town and chatted. As we started heading back, we were already feeling cautious since it was late and we had no idea who might be out. We passed a shop exiting a T-junction onto a local street that was completely dark because the streetlights turn off at 1 a.m. Suddenly, we saw a beat-up white van coming around the corner. Brad joked about us being kidnapped, and then the van stopped right next to us. For context, all the shops were closed, and there was no one around, no reason for the van to stop. Realizing the situation, we ran for about 15 to 20 seconds down this long, pitch-black road towards Brad's house. We stopped, scared, and talked about what just happened. We kept walking down the short road to the house, checking behind us regularly. That's when Rob and Brad saw a man walk around the same corner the van had stopped at. No one else was around, so we knew it was the guy driving the van. We questioned why he was there until he disappeared back around the corner. About 5 seconds later, the van came whipping back around the corner. Without thinking, we started running again, taking a right onto a new road. This road had many side streets with houses, and luckily, ours was the first on the left. While still running, we heard the van getting closer. Brad and Rob managed to hide behind some cars, but I stood there in shock and watched the van pass by at a fast pace. The van slowed down, presumably to turn around, but it was difficult to make a U-turn on that road. We ran halfway down the street. Brad's house was just at the end, before slowing to a walk, constantly looking over our shoulders and ahead, wondering what would happen if the van caught up to us. Brad was really scared and thinking of escape plans if the van returned. We mistook a house light for the van's headlights and started running again. Brad's house was just a 10-second run from our location, and we all quickly jumped into his room through the window. His room is on the ground floor. Now, I'm sitting here writing down what happened. This is a true story, and we're all pretty shaken up, still questioning what exactly happened. In college, I used to deliver pizzas on weekends in a very old and haunted town. One night, I took an order to a street running parallel to a railroad, with a drainage ditch in between. Just before I turned into the driveway on the right, something caught my eye on the left. I glanced over and saw a dark figure crouched in the drainage ditch, peering from behind some weeds. I stared at it for a good 3 seconds before my subconscious made me look back at the road to avoid a crash. As I walked up to the house, I kept an eye on that direction, fearing I might get robbed. Standing sideways to knock on the door, I kept wondering if what I saw was a person or a spirit. After the customer opened the door and I handed over their order, I cautiously walked back to my car, still keeping an eye out. Once safely inside with the doors locked, I relaxed a bit. I backed out of the driveway and drove back to the store. Passing by that spot again, the figure was gone. I wondered how it could have moved without me hearing footsteps on the gravel. Maybe it was lying down, hidden from view. Why was it solid black despite the nearby streetlight? Considering the town's history, the 200-year-old tracks, and the low crime rate, it wouldn't surprise me if it was a spirit. This story might not be the scariest or most exciting, but I promise it's 100% true. It was the summer of 2015, and my buddy, whom I'll call P, was hanging out at his place with his older teenage cousin, whom I'll call L. We were on summer break from high school, and in Australia, summer coincides with Christmas, so naturally the holiday was on our minds. One day, P's mom asked us to take the dogs for a walk, which was unusual since she usually kept us confined to P's backyard, bedroom, or pool to keep an eye on us due to some past incidents with other friends stealing things. Despite finding her request odd, we complied. P's dad was away on a business trip at the time. For context, P has two dogs, a male golden retriever and a female Caucasian shepherd. Due to the hot Australian summer, both dogs had their long fur trimmed. Not many people know about Caucasian shepherds, also called Russian ovcharka or Russian bear dogs. These large, strong dogs are known for their guarding abilities, capable of defending against wolves and bears, though not killing them as myths suggest. Anyway, the three of us started walking the dogs. Given the heat, Elle suggested we take a trail in the nearby bush for some shade. We agreed, despite the risk of encountering snakes in the bush during summer. After about 10 minutes in the bush, both dogs stopped. The golden retriever whimpered and tried to run away, while the Caucasian shepherd stood her ground, sniffing the air and growling. We quickly realized something had spooked them. Elle thought the golden retriever might have been bitten by a snake. Given their trimmed fur, a snake bite was a real concern, so Elle checked for any signs but found nothing. As I scanned the area for snakes, I spotted something far more unsettling. About 17 meters, 55 feet and 9 inches away, I saw a creature leaning against a tree, arms crossed like a human. At first, I thought it was a kangaroo or a large dog, but I quickly realized it was neither. It looked like a tall man-kangaroo hybrid, with human-like arms, small claws on its fingers, and a light brown fur coat. Its face resembled a mix of a kangaroo and a mastiff dog, with very human-like eyes. I called out, "What is that kangaroo doing?" P and L looked over and, seeing it, both exclaimed, "That ain't no kangaroo, mate." Then it started moving towards us, a mix of running and hopping. It seemed to attack only because we had noticed it. We barely had time to react before it was upon us. The creature lunged at me, but the Caucasian shepherd intervened, biting its arm. P fell forward and let go of the leash. The dog's powerful bite, up to 700 psi, caused the creature to yelp in pain. The creature clawed at the Caucasian shepherd, who was usually protected by her long fur but was now vulnerable due to the summer trim. Pinned to the ground, I watched as the dog moved from the creature's arm to its neck, but couldn't maintain the bite. The creature pushed the dog off, turning the fight in its favor. Elle grabbed a large stick and swung it at the creature, which barely affected it. However, the distraction allowed the dog to bite the creature's shoulder. Finally, the creature gave up and retreated into the bush. We ran back to P's house as fast as we could. P and L were crying and I was limping. P ran upstairs to get his mom, who came down in lingerie with a man who wasn't P's dad. She was furious but calmed down after seeing our injuries. She kicked the man out, quickly got changed, and took the dog to the vet while Elle took me to a doctor. The Caucasian shepherd survived that encounter but sadly passed away in 2019 from unrelated causes. The golden retriever is still alive and well. P and L kept quiet about P's mom's situation, but P's dad found out and filed for divorce, which led to further complications. As for the creature, after researching online and watching videos from channels like Mr. Ballin and Darkness Prevails, I believe it might have been a skinwalker, despite them being part of Native American lore from the USA. The Aboriginal Australian legend of the Crotati, a similar creature, also comes to mind. Whatever it was, it left a lasting impression on me, and if I ever get a dog, a Caucasian shepherd is definitely on my list. I worked as a custodian in an elementary school for about a year, and my dad had often told me stories about the place being haunted. He'd come home with tales of what the ghost did that day, eager to see what would happen next. I always thought he was just being his usual goofy self, spinning interesting stories that may or may not have been true. I had never encountered a ghost before and was skeptical, but that changed after my own experience. My first encounter with the ghost happened while I was turning off the hallway lights for the night. It was around 11:25 p.m., and all the classrooms had been cleaned and prepped for the next day. All that was left was securing the building and turning off the lights. As I reached the switches in the front hallway near the library, I heard a faint but clear giggle of a little kid coming from the library. I froze, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. Without wasting another second, I ran to the boiler room where we custodians gather at the end of our shift. I told my coworker, who was on the swing shift with me, what had happened. They were freaked out. I asked them to come with me because I was scared, and we still had a few more lights to turn off. They were reluctant, but I insisted, reminding them we had to turn those lights out or risk getting in trouble. After some convincing, they agreed and stayed very close to me. We quickly turned off the switches by the library, the front doors, and the school kitchen. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night while we were in the hallway. We were both relieved when it was over, but I knew my coworker was only temporary. I was assigned to this school for the foreseeable future and would have to deal with whatever was going on. After my shift, I went home and told my dad what had happened. He didn't believe me and said he felt the spirit had left after he acknowledged its presence for a while. He explained that one day, he felt a lighter weight on his shoulders as if the spirit had moved on, and he hadn't experienced any ghostly encounters since. I suggested that maybe the ghost had come back. My dad brushed it off, but little did he or I know that this was just the beginning of a series of incidents that would follow my own encounter with the ghost boy. Last night, my girlfriend's sister and I went down to the river beach near my college. My girlfriend and I go there often, and since my younger sister was visiting, we decided to take her to the little beach by the river that runs through campus. We planned to have a fire and hang out. To get to the beach, there's a 10 to 15-minute walk through the woods. On our way there, we stayed on the trail without any issues. We spent about an hour and a half on the beach before deciding to head back to watch a movie in our dorm. While walking back, we lost the trail as everything was covered in leaves. It's important to note that there's a clearing with power lines about halfway between the beach and the street at the start of the trail. This clearing has tall grass and pricker bushes, making it difficult to cross unless you're on the trail. Just before reaching this clearing, we lost the trail. We decided to head straight towards the clearing, thinking we could follow it to find the cut-through trail. It was dark, so we all had our phone flashlights on, and my sister was playing music on her phone. We found the clearing and started walking along it, searching for the trail. My girlfriend was a few feet behind my sister and me when I heard a branch snap from deeper in the woods over the music. I told my sister to turn off her music and scan the area with my flashlight. At first, I saw nothing, and when my girlfriend asked what it was, I said it was nothing and continued searching for the trail. Still uneasy, I kept scanning the area and noticed something white with what appeared to be ears standing very still where I heard the noise. I couldn't tell if it was an animal or something else. It was about 15 to 20 feet away, and I couldn't see any eyes reflecting my light, which I assumed I would if it were an animal. Stood very still, so I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I moved my light for a second to keep looking for the trail, and when I shined it back, I saw the thing violently swaying back and forth. I said, "What is that?" and turned around when my sister looked and screamed, "Why is it moving like that?" I've never heard my sister sound so scared. I yelled for my girlfriend and sister to run. We ran through the tall grass and pricker bushes until we emerged on the other side. My sister fell and lost both her shoes. I helped her up and told her to forget the shoes, and we kept running until we found the trail again. We didn't stop running until we were out of the woods. Once back on the street, we calmed down and discussed what we saw. I knew something was off when I saw it swaying. It looked unnatural, almost like a limp slinky. My girlfriend and sister saw it after I turned to look for the way out. They both said it began charging at us while still swaying, which I didn't see. This made it even scarier. None of us saw its face or could fully make out its shape. My girlfriend and sister said it was running on two legs, upright like a person, but moving in a way that didn't seem possible. The whole experience makes no sense, and we've been trying to explain it ever since. To make it even scarier, my girlfriend mentioned that when we first got to the beach, she heard someone walking in the woods behind her while my sister, and I were busy starting the fire. This could be unrelated, but the thought of someone or something watching us the whole time is terrifying. If anyone has any idea what this might have been, please share your insight because we are completely stumped. This is a 100% true story that happened to me. In 2003, I met a guy who promised to take me on adventures and make my life exciting. Little did I know my safe, sheltered world was about to be shattered. I grew up in a small town and had never really traveled outside my state. I hadn't experienced life as others had, and we were somewhat sheltered from the big crimes and other issues occurring across the country. My now ex-boyfriend decided to take me on a journey as an over-the-road truck driver. In many ways, it was a great experience. We had a lot of fun, and I got to see most of the US. However, trucking life is tough, and being on the road 24/7 isn't easy. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone for so long can drive anyone crazy. Life on the road is very different now compared to when I was trucking. Nowadays, technology advancements allow people to binge watch YouTube, surf the web, or play games on their phones to pass the time. Back then, our only forms of entertainment were watching one of the dozen or so DVDs, reading yet another book, or talking on the radio. We often chose the latter, which became our version of social media long before Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter were even thought of. Just like today, we would create different identities or personas to interact with people who were essentially strangers. And trust me, some truckers can be quite creepy. Keeping some anonymity was the only way to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf, changed for safety reasons. And since I was young, barely 20, and from Alaska, mine ended up being Northern Exposure, again, changed for safety reasons. During our time on the road, we met a lot of crazy people and witnessed some bizarre things. Most of the stories you hear about the road are more gross than scary, like drivers getting a bit too friendly with their cabin buddies, whether it be a dog, cat, or even goat. But this time, I experienced one of the most terrifying events of my life, and my life is full of strange and unusual incidents. Have you ever gotten the heebie-jeebies from someone's voice? Like you're flat out scared to talk to someone because their voice just seems off? That was this guy. Something about him made my skin crawl, and I had only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. One day, the CB started to crackle, and we heard a distant voice, barely audible through the static. As he got closer, we could hear him clearly. He must have been about 50 miles behind us, as his voice was faint but audible thanks to our CB radio's extended range. Then I heard it, that voice. It's hard to explain, but the best way I can describe it now is like how Heath Ledger's Joker sounds in the Batman movie. There was something just off about it, and it gave me chills. He simply said, "Hey there, Purple Pete, our truck's color. Where you headed?" My ex responded that we were heading to Arkansas. The driver said he was going the same way and asked if he could tag along with us, introducing himself as Maniac. We often ran routes from one coast to the other and back. This guy always seemed to be on the same route as us, but we had never actually seen his truck. He described it as a black 378 long-nosed Peterbilt with a brow and cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry box from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going on the I-10. One week, while we were running from Florida back to LA, we caught up with him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we were on our way back since we would have run out of hours and needed a rest. We agreed, even though I didn't really want to meet this guy. My ex had become friends with him, so we gave him an estimated time of arrival and the truck stop where we would meet for a meal. This was before cell phones were common for anything other than emergencies, so we couldn't just call him when we were in the area. He agreed and we parted ways. My ex continued talking to him until the radios could no longer reach. We finished our load and headed to Las Vegas, to the truck stop where we had agreed to meet. Las Vegas can be a shady place for truckers, with a lot of crime and bad things happening, so we waited in the truck. Eventually, we got bored and ventured into the truck stop for a bit. We waited and waited, but he never showed up, and we couldn't contact him. We eventually left for another load, never meeting him in Nevada. However, a few months later, we encountered him in Oklahoma. We had heard chatter on the radio about lot lizards, truck stop prostitutes, being brutally murdered at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. We initially dismissed it as drama on the radio, since truckers often make up stories. We kept hearing about it and even mentioned it to Maniac. He just laughed and said, "It must be one real sick person doing it. It must just be a story, because if it were true, they would have caught him already." I bet he's even left fingerprints or other evidence at the crime scenes. With as bloody and messy as it was, I bet he wants to get caught. It seemed like a strange thing to say, but he was a strange guy, so it seemed in character for him. Maniac went his way and we went ours. After a while, I forgot about the weird comment. Fast forward a few weeks, and we were in Mississippi when we heard a familiar voice on the radio. It was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend for Labor Day, planning to spend some time at a lake in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop our trailer and head out bobtail. We chatted, and he said he was heading to Tennessee and would be leaving the next morning. So, cutting our much-needed break short, we decided to run with him so my ex would have someone to talk to. We had gotten into an argument earlier, and I wasn't speaking to him, which he hated. Our load was to be delivered in North Carolina in a few days. So being a few hours ahead of schedule just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick up our next load. It was a win-win situation. We left that morning and headed out. The guys decided we would stop in Tennessee and finally meet in person after chatting for about 6 months. We weren't afraid to meet up with him, but I was still very on edge. I wasn't a slouch. I grew up with 15 boys in the house and was known to be a fighter. My ex was a bigger guy, standing 6 feet 3 inches and about 280 pounds. So, theoretically, we could handle him if necessary. The only way he could get the best of us was if he had a weapon, which was highly illegal to have in trucks back then, with jail time being the penalty if caught by the DOT. Our company had specific fuel stations we could use. Maniac, being an owner-operator, could go anywhere. Maniac said he had already stopped for fuel and a shower, but would drop his trailer and meet us at a Flying J, a truck stop, down the road from where he was, which I believe was a Love's fuel station. We fueled up, showered, and got a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food and continued waiting. No one showed up, and we had no way to contact him. My ex was not a patient man, so we ate and then headed back to our truck. I remember it being dark and humid, probably around 10 p.m. The truck stop was unusually quiet, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a creepy truck stop. As we walked across the fuel island, we were greeted. A flurry of flashing lights. It's not uncommon for lot lizards to get busted or for drivers to get involved in things they shouldn't, so we didn't think much of it. But this was more than typical truck stop shenanigans. We passed about a dozen trucks in this large Flying J, which could accommodate around 80 truck and trailer combinations. There was also a dirt lot where more trucks could park. As we walked, we noticed a bobtail truck parked in a full spot, which was unusual because bobtails typically park at the end of a row to leave the larger spots for trucks with trailers. We passed the bobtail, which was a dark truck, maybe black or dark blue, with a cattle guard and a brow. I didn't pay much attention to the make of the truck. It just looked menacing in the dark. There was a guy sitting in the passenger seat with a red reading light on, giving him a distorted look. He gave me the creepiest smile and then quickly shut his blinds. We were about 6 trucks down from the bobtail. I could still see its red light through the small slit in the curtain, and the driver was still watching us. Despite the warmth, I felt a chill run up my spine and a sudden feeling of dread. We finally got back to our truck and turned on the CB for some night entertainment and to try contacting Maniac to see what had happened. The chatter was about the police and a murder at the truck stop just south of us. Then, a familiar voice came over the radio. "Hey there, Northern Exposure. Sorry I missed ya. Looks like I got here just a few minutes after you left. Maybe next time, pretty girl." The blood drained from my face as I heard Maniac's voice. He was the guy in the truck we had walked past. My ex tried to ask where he was, but Maniac just laughed, saying he was running a bit behind and had to go. Then his radio went silent. I was shaken, and for good reason. A trucker friend, who had been parked behind the truck stop, said he saw the police removing a woman's body from a truck and that they had the driver in custody. He said they arrested a long-haired man, which Maniac had. We listened intently to the police scanner and other truckers discussing the situation. It was confirmed that a woman had been found and dead, in the back of a truck in the dirt lot. I was sick to my stomach. Maniac's weird comments and the eeriness of the situation suddenly made sense. I will never know if the truck we saw belonged to Maniac, but I have no doubt he was the killer. The timing, his sudden departure, and the way he spoke, it all added up. We later heard more stories about the murdered lot lizards, and after our incident, we no longer heard Maniac's voice on the radio. It's been over 20 years, and I'll never forget that creepy feeling. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice in my head, and a shiver runs down my spine. I've always been scared of thunderstorms ever since my parents took me to a reenactment of one of the worst tornadoes in the world when I was young. Since then, I've always associated thunderstorms with big tornadoes, so I feel lucky to live in an area that rarely gets hit by severe storms. One day, my brother and I convinced our dad to take us to see the new World War Z movie. We were both very young and couldn't watch it on our own, and luckily we didn't. Before we left, the sky was unusually dark, darker than I had ever seen, but I was too excited to pay much attention to it. I found the movie scary, and my heart was racing, especially during the plane crash scene near the end. I was sunk down in my seat, a scared little kid, when suddenly the screen and lights all went out. My heart sank, and for a moment I thought it was just a projector issue, but then the staff came in. We were told that we had lost power and needed to take shelter in the main entrance. I guess the movie was so loud that none of us heard it, but when we reached the lobby, all we could see was a gray blanket of rain. Every few seconds, a bright flash of lightning would illuminate only a few feet ahead of us. The wind was so strong that anything outside was tilted at an angle. That was one of the few times I've heard the wind howl that loudly. My brother and father aren't as scared of storms as I am, which somehow made me even more frightened, as I felt a bit crazy for being the only one so worried. I probably thought they didn't realize how dangerous a storm like this could be. I was shaking a bit when my dad suggested running out to get the car and picking us up at the entrance. That snapped me out of my trance a bit, and he was already heading out for the car. I stood there with my brother, waiting for what felt like forever, just looking for the headlights of our car. I never got a good look at my brother's face to see what he was feeling, but he seemed calmer than me because I didn't hear a peep from him. After watching person after person run to their cars and others driving by, I finally saw our car. We ran to it and the rain pelted us. We were drenched by the time we made it to the car, even though it was just a few steps away. My dad asked if we were okay, and we said yes, but not much else, I think. By that time, I was just trying to calm down and tune things out. The drive home wasn't great either. During the drive, my brother thought it would be funny to mess with me. He kept taunting me, saying things like, "Hey, look outside. It's not that bad. And why are you so scared?" While rolling down my window to let the rain in, scaring me even more. Eventually, my dad told him to stop and leave me alone. I did look outside occasionally and saw pools of water deep enough to sink a car, cars with all their lights on so we could see them, and trees and power lines shaking in the wind. I eventually stopped looking and just stared at my feet, trying to tune everything out. All I could hear was the rain pelting our car and the windshield wipers moving as fast as they could. There are other small things that happened, but I don't want to make this too long, lol. When we got home, 25 minutes had passed for what was usually a 10-minute drive. The storm was clearing up, and we saw that our street had been hit hard. Our neighbors have 3 giant trees in their front yard, and one had fallen and completely blocked the road. One of our neighbors used a chainsaw to cut it and their car to move a bit of it so cars could pass. I was already inside, in bed, scared and crying, holding my stuffed animals, thanking whatever kept us safe from getting stuck or being hit by a tornado. I had this nightmare when I was around 8 or 9 years old, and I remember it as vividly as the night it happened. I fell asleep as usual, with the background noise of my mom watching TV in the living room and chain-smoking her Marlboro Silvers. Suddenly, I woke up, but not really, and I felt a sense of extreme dread. I could still hear the background noise of my mom watching her usual late-night shows. I got up, opened my door, and started to call for her. Almost immediately, she responded, saying, "Over here, honey." I stopped before reaching the living room area where she typically lounged and saw my mother downstairs in the entryway. It was dark except for a few lights illuminating the upper floor of the house. I stood against the stair railing to get a better look, and just as I realized it was not my mother, the railing started to fall apart. I fell into the arms of a stranger, and I saw that it was indeed someone else. It was a man wearing a tutu, a tiara, holding a magic wand, and with short curly hair. I was immediately terrified as he and his accomplice, who seemed to appear out of nowhere, carried me down a spiraling staircase that I no longer recognized as being in my home. I remember them telling me not to be scared and that they were taking me to my new home, where everything would be pink and pretty. The last thing I remember was being placed on a chair similar to those in doctors' or dentists' offices, and they tied me down, laughing with terrifying grins on their faces. The room was actually gray and dully lit. It was neither pink nor pretty. I still get chills when I think about this nightmare. I remember waking up terrified but didn't go out to my mom because I felt frozen with fear and didn't know if I was truly awake or still stuck in the nightmare. I just tried my hardest to go back to sleep, hoping to have good dreams, and I told my friends about it the next day and how horrifying it all was. This story is about a bad experience I had when I went camping on the beach in the summer with my boyfriend. We had the idea of camping on the beach instead of staying at a hotel because I always wanted to sleep to the sound of the waves hitting the shore, gaze at the night sky whenever I wanted, and just experience this at least once in my life. We planned to stay in our tent for a week. The area had public restrooms with showers and nearby restaurants, so hygiene and food weren't an issue. We brought all the supplies we needed for the adventure. A two-person tent that blocked out sunlight, an inflatable mattress, a first aid kit, lanterns for the tent, and so on. The first few nights went smoothly, and we enjoyed every moment. We always took all our valuables with us in backpacks, just in case anything happened to our tent, phones, chargers, wallets, etc. We weren't the only ones camping there. The beach was popular with singles, couples, and even families, including some who didn't behave well. At night, you could occasionally hear people laughing, partying, dancing, listening to music, and sometimes smoking weed, taking drugs, or drinking a lot of alcohol. We didn't mind it since no one had bothered anyone for the first 4 days and nights. Everyone was having fun in their own way, and there was no aggression. One night, we stayed out later than usual, around 1 a.m., wandering the lively streets, listening to street performers and eating out. At one point, we stopped at a street performer surrounded by a crowd. However, we soon realized that he wasn't the main attraction. In the middle of the crowded street, where cars occasionally passed by, a middle-aged woman was dancing completely naked, clearly affected by alcohol and or drugs. She was incoherent, randomly flirting with people, and exposing herself while dancing to the music, much to the disgust of the musician and passers-by. We didn't dwell on it and decided to head back to our tent, have a drink, and watch the stars while falling asleep to the sound of the ocean. While we were drinking, we heard a woman shouting in the distance. It was the same woman we had seen earlier, but now she had friends with her, 2 men and 2 women. They had set up camp on the same beach, a few tents away from us, but close enough for us to see and hear them, even in the dark. They lit a fire on the beach and continued drinking, smoking, and dancing around it. The woman was still naked but now wore a see-through skirt. She went into the ocean for what seemed like an eternity. I remember thinking, how is she not cold? The water must be freezing. My boyfriend just shrugged and told me not to be bothered. He said if we didn't engage with them, they wouldn't bother us. So I tried to ignore them, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We decided to go to sleep but left the tent partially open, with only the mosquito net zipped up, to let in the fresh air and allow the morning sun to wake us early. I don't recall how long I'd been asleep, but I was awakened by footsteps circling our tent and a woman's voice humming softly. The tent walls were thin, so I could hear everything outside. I was too scared to look out or even move, for fear of letting the person outside know I was aware of their presence. I lay there, staring out through the mosquito netting. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped above my head, and I heard the voice whisper, "Don't be afraid. I only want to sing you a lullaby." Then the footsteps started again, circling the tent. I saw her feet in front of our tent, the familiar see-through skirt trailing behind her. The next morning, we packed up our tent and moved to a different area of the beach, as far away as possible from that woman and her friends. I currently live in a small, somewhat rural town. It's a bit remote, but still offers plenty of good shopping, dining options, and public spaces. We even have a few breweries and bars now. It's become a trendy place, with farms on the outskirts where I can buy fresh eggs and vegetables directly from the source. The pandemic really hurt local businesses, and for a while, the only regular delivery options were Walmart and Amazon. I was thrilled when more local delivery options became available through various apps later on. However, at that time, for basic necessities and groceries, the only option was store delivery from the Walmart in the next town. This meant a lot of strangers were coming through, which drove some of the older folks in the neighborhood crazy. They were constantly talking about unfamiliar cars and people. I embraced it because it made my life easier. It was great for a while. At that time, I lived with my teenage son, who was a lanky 6 feet 4 inches, and my then boyfriend, who was staying with us to be near his elderly parents. He's 6 feet 3 inches and broadly built. The space felt cramped with these big guys around all the time, so occasionally, I would send them off on errands or they would visit my boyfriend's parents, giving me some space to work on things or just enjoy being alone. One day, I received a delivery. I recognized the delivery guy, greeted him, and tipped him well. Then I went about my day. An hour later, he was back at my door. It was unsettling because, while I have steps in front of my door, there's no porch. He knocked and stood beside the steps where I couldn't see him through the peephole, but I could see him through a window next to the door. I spoke to him through the window, asking, "What's up? Can I help you?" The lower part of the window is covered with privacy film, but I can see through the upper part by standing on my couch. He seemed to search for where my voice was coming from before finally saying he forgot a bag from the delivery. I confirmed I had received everything and thanked him. I didn't want to open the door again, especially after noticing I was alone. Later, my new neighbor from the unit across the way, who had installed a Ring camera, reached out to me. She told me someone had come by, knocking and sitting on my steps for about half an hour. I was at my boyfriend's house with my son at the time, and she sent me a still image from her camera. It looked like the delivery guy, and it was around 8 p.m. I didn't have any open orders. I contacted Walmart, but they were unhelpful. They assured me he wouldn't deliver to me in the future, but they wouldn't provide any information I could pass on to security or the police in case something else happened. I wanted to at least file a report with my security company, but they said the police would need to initiate that. I had a bad feeling things might escalate, and they did. I didn't want to be home alone anymore. I stopped ordering deliveries and just tried to be cautious. However, my neighbor placed a delivery order, and somehow that guy delivered it. He was on the property and just 3 feet away from my door. The creepy part was, I heard the delivery being dropped off and felt the urge to look through the peephole. I saw him standing in front of my stairs, looking around at my door and windows. He stood there for about 5 minutes until my neighbor opened her door to get her groceries. I pointed him out to her as the guy from the Ring camera footage. She also contacted Walmart to request that he not deliver to her anymore. A few weeks later, just before Christmas, I ordered a few items from Amazon. I heard the delivery being dropped off and saw the delivery person walk away. My boyfriend was on the couch with his headphones on, working, and I was cooking dinner. I figured I'd grab the packages in a moment since they were safe on the steps and there was a camera monitoring the area. As I was setting down plates for dinner, I heard the doorknob, which wasn't locked, give a tiny turn. The deadbolt was latched, but the knob wasn't, and I could hear it. My boyfriend, oblivious to these things, took off his headphones and looked through the window above the door, saying, "Oh, you must be hearing things. No one's touching the doorknob." He opened the door to show me there was nothing there. But the guy was crouched against the wall under the window, hands still on the doorknob, trying to turn it quietly. He seemed startled when my boyfriend opened the door and looked confused when my son came up too. He asked for me by name, using the name on my account, which isn't the name everyone knows me by. My boyfriend asked what he wanted, and the guy picked up the Amazon box, claiming it was a delivery, and then left. It was really strange because the packages were already there. We took the footage to the police and tried to contact Walmart. The police reached out to Walmart but encountered only clueless customer service agents. They advised me to call them immediately if the guy showed up again. I was really scared. I was relieved that he now knew I wasn't home alone, but I feared he might take more drastic measures. I didn't know how people like that think, so I was running through every possible scenario. The sprinkler system automatically kicks in at 11 p.m., cycling through the property for an hour. It starts near my bedroom wall, which faces the parking lot, and by midnight, it reaches the front lawn area to the right of my front door. One night, I was in bed when I heard it click on. The sprinklers are noisy because they hit gravel, which covers a lot of sound. When they switched to the next area, I heard a strange shuffling noise. We have a lot of cats outside, so I wasn't too alarmed. The next morning, when I was leaving for work, I noticed the window screens were removed and placed beneath the windows. There were handprints smudged all over the glass. There were no clear footprints, just deep muddy patches. I filed another report, but the response was similarly unhelpful. They basically told me to get a camera and stay vigilant to catch any suspicious activity in the act. I didn't even bother contacting Walmart again. They were utterly useless. The last incident happened when my boyfriend was coming over late one night after a long day at work. He arrived around 3 a.m., and I woke up to loud noises outside. Apparently, the guy had been hiding under my car and scrambled out when my boyfriend pulled into the parking lot. My boyfriend pretended to walk to the fire lane, watching the guy slide out and hide behind other parked cars. It looked like he had been messing with my car. My boyfriend confronted him, and I called the police. They found an AirTag taped under my car. He was trying to track me away from my house. The guy was arrested and faced other charges as well. I provided statements and incident report numbers and was told I might need to testify, but that hasn't happened. Since then, there have been no more incidents. I'll preface this by saying I've never been a big believer in the paranormal, but this experience definitely challenged my skepticism. Between 2016 and 2018, I was a supervisor in a warehouse. During that time, particularly towards the end of my tenure, 3 separate incidents occurred that I found quite spooky. What made them eerie was that all 3 were corroborated by other staff members or contractors who had no knowledge of my experiences. It's also important to note that my company had 2 units at opposite ends of the building, while another company occupied the larger middle unit. The first incident seemed insignificant at first, but turned out to be quite creepy. While walking down the aisles picking orders, I sometimes heard whistling, the kind of whistle you might use if you were hiding and wanted to taunt someone. The first few times it happened, I would smile and look for the source, thinking it was a colleague playing a prank. However, there weren't many places to hide in the warehouse. There were 5 long aisles running the full length of the building, with only one aisle cutting across the middle, and you could see between the shelves and most of the racking. Despite this, I could never find the source. After a while, I shrugged it off, not wanting to play along. Weeks later, a colleague who worked in the other unit mentioned that he often felt uneasy because he also heard whistling when he was alone. He described the whistle, and it was exactly the same as the one I had heard. The second incident was even more unsettling. One day, while I was working in the packing area alone, I faintly heard someone call my name. Initially, I thought it might have been the radio and dismissed it, but then I heard it again, this time more clearly. I walked to the end of the packing area, which opened up into the warehouse, but saw no one. I even went to the small canteen area where a colleague was sitting and asked if he had called me, but he denied it, and it wouldn't have sounded so loud from behind a wall. The third time I heard it, it was crystal clear. I went into the warehouse, calling out, "Hello? Is someone shouting my name?" But there was no one there. I checked every aisle and even the office, but no one had left their desk. The strangest part was that a few days later, a different colleague who hadn't been present during the incident told me that he had heard someone shouting my name while he was alone. Not his name, still my name. The final and most terrifying incident occurred when I saw a man out of my peripheral vision walking down the aisle next to me, parallel to me. As soon as I registered someone there, I looked across through the gaps in the racking, but no one was there. We all occasionally see things out of the corner of our eyes, but in this case, I saw him in detail. He appeared to be around 60 years old, with ashen hair, glasses, and was wearing white overalls. Our warehouse uniform was a black polo shirt. I have a pretty good imagination, but I don't think I could have conjured up such a vivid image in a split second. A few days later, I was in our second unit, and some subcontractors were there installing new racking. One of them mentioned that they were almost done and would come in on Saturday to finish, but he wouldn't come in alone without his colleague. I asked, "Is that a health and safety rule that you can't be here alone?" He replied, "No, it's just that whenever I'm here by myself, I see a guy in white overalls walking around, and it freaks me out." I felt a chill run down my spine. He must have noticed the change in my expression because he immediately asked, "You've seen him, haven't you?" I still don't know what to make of these experiences, but they definitely creeped me out. It's been a while. I got back from overseas not long ago, but that's not why I'm here. This is from a while ago back near the end of 2020. I was visiting my family for Christmas and had to stay for a bit before I headed to visit my in-laws for New Year's Eve. I slept in my old room since there was still a bed there and I needed the space so I could keep all my pets there. I have a lot of caged animals and needed more space than the basement guest room. This plays a factor in my story later. I had a good Christmas that year, and the night before I left is when it happened. I was finished feeding my pets and was talking to my, at the time, fiancé, and then it happened. I heard the familiar sounds of steps on the roof. Then the familiar thud outside my window. I was petrified. I hadn't seen him for over a year, and he shows up now. I pretended to go to sleep, and he seemed to just look puzzled. He looked like he was about to leave, but one of my hamsters decided to start biting the bars of their cage, and it caused him not to leave. I had to get out of my bed while he was watching and transfer them to a cage without any bars. He stayed outside my window till the sun started coming up, and the creepiest thing happened before he left. I thought these guys weren't supposed to talk, but in a guttural and deep voice he said, "Welcome back." This scarred me. By this time it was about 0400 and I had a 5 to 7 hour drive and I've had no sleep. I couldn't sleep till about 0600 and I slept till about 0900 and powered my way to my in-laws. The Wendigo I also saw had matured. I learned this while overseas. One person in my squad informed me the skull on their heads indicate that it means they're an adult, and when they don't it means they're in the adolescent stage, which is probably why I'm alive. I've had a lot of times in my life which I should have died. I think my luck is running out. Hope that's the last time I see him. Every summer I go camping in Yosemite with my cousins, and every trip we spend a night stargazing. There's a village with markets and restaurants down the road from the campsites, and across the road from the village is a large field of tall grass with a winding narrow boardwalk that leads deep into the field. Imagine a boardwalk dock that reaches out into a bay, but instead of open water, it's a field surrounded by towering trees. This is where we usually sit to watch the stars. This night of stargazing was uneventful as the sky was cloudy that night and we weren't able to see the stars at all, so we just sat and smoked for a bit. One of my cousins noticed a light deep within the woods that was still and bright. He pointed it out because he thought it was odd that there was a light in that direction to begin with, as that area of woods had no buildings or campsites, which meant that there shouldn't be people in that area as it was very late by this time. We moved closer towards that area of the woods along the boardwalk and was able to see that the light was twinkling. It looked as though the light came from a flame. It's strict in the rules of any wooded national park that you shouldn't light flames in areas that don't have a designated fire pit. My cousin was certain that where the light was coming from was empty and open woods and was well out of distance from any campsites, roads, and housing. The flame must have been very deep into the woods because no matter how close we got along the boardwalk, the light wasn't becoming any more clear to make out. We stopped when we heard commotion, as though a large group of people were there. We assumed that there must have been a party going on until we heard chanting. It started as loud party sounds, but slowly turned into synchronized whooping and then howling. Not like a wolf howl, but more like harmonized groans and wailing. The voices became more guttural and projected almost as though the people making them were in pain or misery. The sounds we heard were no longer ignorable, and it was obvious something odd was happening in those woods. Before I knew it, I was the only one closest to the end of the boardwalk when I turned around and saw all my cousins stayed back huddled far behind me staring with me into the trees. My heart was racing, and all there was to see was that light twinkling deep in the dark. The faint sounds of wailing was enough to know that whatever was going on around that light wasn't a party. The next morning my cousins and I ventured into the woods in the general direction of where we saw the light, and sure enough it was empty woods in every direction for an acre or two. No sign of camps or cabins. The only evidence of any people being there was a large patch of dirt and pine needles where we found masses of bare footprints left in the mud and soil. We got a new starter, which is pretty common. He was immediately a bit weird, though. I showed him around and went through the motions, but he rarely spoke. Even while driving around, he would only look forward and wouldn't glance left or right to anything. I had him drug tested because I thought the guy might be on something, but the test came back negative. The only issue was that the sample looked discolored, so I dip tested it and found it had blood in it. Annoyed that pre-employment screening didn't catch this, I referred him to a GP. We continued on, and I pretty much just put him in front of a computer with training videos and such. On the third day, he didn't show up, but another new starter arrived. After introductions, I realized he had the same name but was clearly a different person. I checked his driver's license, birth certificate, etc., and he had a manila folder with all his information, which made it easy. I hadn't checked the initial because it's just unheard of. We checked the accommodation assigned to the first guy, but it was untouched. CCTV footage didn't show anything unusual over the last few days, except one day where it showed me dropping him off. He remained standing on the front lawn for 3 hours before just walking off. I'm unsure what to make of that one. Hello, my name is Steven, and this story takes place when I was 14 years old. Where I live, there is a nature preserve just up the road I live on. This nature preserve has a park, soccer fields, ECT, perfect place to hang out with your friends. At the time this took place, it was sometime around April, so it was just starting to get warmer where I live. Me and my friend had spring tryouts for our school soccer team coming up, so we would go up to the fields at the nature preserve every day when we got back from school. This particular instance, we went to the park at around 5:30 and left around 8:30, so it's quite dark out. Now this road that this nature preserve is on becomes very eerie and dark because there are no lights once you pass my neighborhood, and it's a good 15-minute walk from my neighborhood, so we are in the pitch dark for a good bit. I happen to be on my skateboard, my friend on his bike. This is a key detail later in the story. Now obviously a skateboard and a bike have a speed difference, so in order to stick together we just decided to walk our vehicles until we were back in a lighted area so we wouldn't get separated. I love to document everything I found interesting, so every day when we would walk home in the dark, I would record in case I caught something interesting or unexplainable, which I definitely did. We were about halfway there, and we were joking and trying to scare each other, saying things like, "Imagine Pennywise just comes out of nowhere," which looking back at that, we probably jinxed ourselves, lol. Now the road is surrounded by woods, and there are lots of wildlife in our area. All of a sudden we hear footsteps right next to us in the woods, and we immediately stopped talking and became very alert and ready to book it if something popped out. And then the scariest shit happened. We heard a voice say my friend's name. Immediately after, a growl-like noise, and this tall-ass thing just pops out the fucking woods, and my friend just leaves me behind on his bike, so I throw my skateboard at it and run. Keep in mind, all of this is on video, so I have proof and anyone wants to see. But oh my god, the adrenaline. Once we got home, my friend's dad got his Glock, and we went back to retrieve my skateboard, and that's about the end of the story. T was Friday, the last day of school. The bell was about to ring. Our teacher said that have a good weekend, and boom, the bell rings. So as I was about to take a turn into our longest hallway of the school. So as I'm just walking down, suddenly it felt so cold that felt like he was ice around me. I just wanted to. AC was on for too long in the school. So as I was halfway, all of a sudden that like something touched my shoulder. Look back, nobody was there then. Look in front of me, then I see me like it was a mirror hallway, copy everything I did. Then all of a sudden the fake me start running towards me, so I run as fast as I could, and it felt like I slowed down. I look behind me, it's gone. Did I look in front of me? I was outside. All of a sudden then my friend to have me on my shoulders and, hey, you've been daydreaming for the last 2 minutes. But I know that was no dream. I know I was glad for the last day. I never went back to school.